across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk 0344 499 1000. Thank you to Julia. She's back tomorrow. Welcome to the home of common sense. As you've been hearing throughout the course of this morning, Britain's spending a staggering £4.7 billion a year to house and care for migrants, a cost equal to the income tax paid by nearly 600,000 workers, roughly the population of Manchester, financing the existence of illegal migration. We'll have some details on that in a few moments. We'll look into the numbers too. But there is a fairly reasonable question when it comes to illegal migration. How bad does it have to get? We'll open the lines on that one immediately. Also this afternoon, Chancellor Rachel Reeves has been warned the police service is broken due to low pay, long hours and poor morale as she plans real-term budget increases over the next 3 years to tackle crime. But will it ever be enough? More on that later. And Greta Thunberg and her Freedom Flotilla crew will be forced to watch a video of Hamas's October the 7th atrocities after their Gaza-bound aid boat was boarded by Israeli forces. They'll probably argue it's not real or something like that. Everything you need to know, and of course all the breaking news right here on Talk 0344 499 1000. It seems forever we've been discussing illegal migration. We are predominantly talking about people who come across via the boats on the channel, not legal migration, not overstayers, those people that are stuffed into hotels right across the country. And there are many of them. In fact, there are 32,500 just from this year alone, and they're staying in over 200 hotels. The cost is astronomical. There could be no one with a straight face of any political persuasion that would say that any of this is okay. You have to take a reality check sometimes, and the reality check might be uncomfortable for certain parts of the political spectrum. The idea that you don't want to help destitute, vulnerable people, well, if that were the very scenario we were facing, I think our views may be a little different. But of course, we all know that isn't really the scenario we are facing. We are looking at people who've come across the channel, I'll say it for the umpteenth time, don't blame those people for giving it a go, fighting fit, mostly young, average age 23-year-old males, changing their life. They want to change their life. They've come from Eritrea, Iran, you name it, all sorts of places, often just Albania even, for goodness sake. I mean, we're not talking about people who've always fled countries that you could say are dubious or war-torn even, for that matter. But how bad does it have to get? £4.7 billion annual bill. That is the equivalent tax of almost 600,000 workers. And we are grateful for Jamie Jenkins, the statistician, who joined Mike this morning talking about this. He said, it's not just unsustainable, it is outrageous. Is there anyone at all, even if you had the boy Jones from The Guardian sitting here, could he honestly look you in the eye and go, yeah, this is perfectly reasonable use of our money? £4.7 billion. This is at a time, of course, when money is being taken from pensioners, from the disabled, where certain areas where money is desperately needed is not going because they ain't got any money. They've run out of money. They've got a big black hole, remember. The hole keeps getting bigger, bigger than I think Liz Truss ended up with under Rachel Reeves. Nobody's saying too much about that. However, it's huge. But 4.7 billion, which, by the way, would go some way to affecting various areas of our industry, is by any stretch a lot of money, right? You don't need me, you don't have to be an economist to explain just the enormity of what we're talking about here. A government that borrows billions each year, says Jamie, can't control borders and taxes its citizens to pay for hotel rooms and housing for people who've just arrived. It's not working for the British public. It's time for a system that protects the people who pay in, that reward contribution and that puts citizens first. And it's interesting, isn't it, how narratives change depending on where somebody sits politically. I was listening to Julia brilliantly nail what's been happening in LA in terms of the riots out there that are being described sort of mostly peaceful. I mean, these were flipping riots. You know, so this is before Trump had sent anybody in. These were riots, OK? But if you're sort of rioting from the left, it's just a bit of a protest, you know, with the odd skirmish. But it's not a riot. No, it's a riot. Believe me, it's a riot. And similarly, with something like this, you would think you have to call. Why has it become, or how has it become, so awkward or unfashionable or categorically wrong to suggest you might want to, above anything else, put British citizens first? British citizens, and particularly the most vulnerable. I think of the elderly. I think of the disabled. I think of former military personnel sleeping in shop doorways. That's the group of people that I think could well do with a slice of £4.7 billion, right? I mean, these numbers are absolutely huge. It costs $41,000 a year for each migrant. In 2020, it was $17,000 a year. I don't know what kind of contracts they're signing here. This is crazy. $41,000 a year. The average UK salary is $38,000 a year. We're paying more for people to row over the channel and find themselves in the Four Seasons. Each worker pays income tax and national insurance contributions of $8,000. So the entire tax bill for nearly 600,000 people, equal to the population of Manchester, goes on housing migrants. Your system is broken. If this is the headline of the system, it's knackered, right? It's absolutely knackered. It's not a debating point. There's no other view. It's broken. It's broken irredeemably until somebody comes along and says, do you know what, this can't carry on. So we're going to do this instead. What is the this, in your view? 0344 499 1000. And a simple question, how bad does it have to get? Because you can't imagine a world where, in this respect, in this area, it could be any worse. But of course, over the course of the next months, that number will increase. The number of migrants will increase, the number staying in hotels will increase, and therefore the total bill to house those people will increase. We're at 4.7 billion now. It's not going to take a moment for that to tip over the 5 billion mark. These are the kind of numbers we're dealing with. We hear this so often, we've almost glazed over at the reality. We are spending nearly £5 billion on housing people that shouldn't be here. I mean, wow, let it settle for a second. Just digest that. If you are from the left, by the way, just explain to me how you tell your kids about that. How you would, with a straight face, somehow find the room to construct a defence of that number as to why it is actually money well spent and it's right that we spend it. Really? I'm all ears at this, and I'm always willing to believe there's something spectacular that I've missed in these kind of areas. I'm not so sure. Illegal migration, how bad does it have to get? 0344 499 1000. Let's get a word from Candice Holdsworth, writer and broadcaster. Afternoon to you, Candice.
Afternoon.
Nice to have you with us. Lots to talk about here, including this first story, the study that has found the number of the number of money, the amount of money being spent keeping migrants in hotels is the equivalent to the tax paid by almost 600,000 workers. This is the population of Manchester. I mean, this is just jaw-dropping stuff. Let's have a listen to Nigel Farage emphasising this exact point just over a week ago.
The cost of asylum seeker accommodation, be it hotels or be it houses of multiple occupancy, as I mentioned earlier, £4 billion every year. That may be a slightly low estimate because actually the overall costs of illegal immigration are much higher.
So there it is. In fact, 4.7 billion is the latest stat we have, Candice. How bad does it have to get?
Oh, I mean, this is bad. I mean, this is crisis-inducing, and thank goodness people are finally talking about this. I mean, I remember when I first started discussing this with other journalists on Talk and various other places. It was a difficult conversation to have, and people were almost afraid to say anything because, you know, anyone who ever talked about this problem was just smeared as a racist. But now I think the floodgates are open and people don't care anymore. I think especially when Labour came in and cut the winter fuel allowance,
yep.
And yet billions and billions and billions was being spent on this. It's like, how do you have your priorities so utterly, totally wrong? I mean, we've even got people becoming millionaires now off this industry. I mean, they're making a fortune off these migrant hotels.
Yeah.
It's enough. It's absolutely enough. We're not acting in our rational self-interest anymore.
And you've only got to look at that headline that Jamie Jenkins, the statistician who worked on this, that the equivalent of the entire working population of Manchester are working solely to finance migrant hotels. I mean, that's just unacceptable.
It is, and we've got the highest tax burden that we've ever had since the war, actually, when there was a wartime economy. And I don't think people feel they're getting anything back for it. I mean, the amount of conversations I have with people who say they just have nothing left at the end of the month. And these aren't people who are poor. These are people who both parents are working. They're paying for their mortgage, which is just through the roof. They're paying for childcare. They're paying for bills. And they've got nothing. They've got nothing left at the end of the month. They go to the NHS. They can't get an appointment. Their children's school has to fire teachers because they can't fund them. I mean, it's just ridiculous now. I mean, I don't know how our priorities got so out of whack, but it is a massive sign of decline. It really is. Look, I don't think we should be totally helpless. I think political pressure must be applied, and I think it is being applied now. I think the Conservatives were utterly useless when they had the chance to change it. They never opposed this stuff properly, and this is what the majority of people in the country want, even Labour voters. And you see Labour now has realised this. They've realised this big time. I think they got a massive shock with the winter fuel allowance. They weren't expecting such a backlash.
Yeah, somebody's got to do something about it, and I just simply don't buy into the idea that there's no other options, just the way it has to be. It cannot be. I would have this on a war footing, Candice. I'd put this in the same emergency territory as you would if you were looking at an impending battle coming your way. That's how governments need to look at it. But of course, it's not really in the DNA of Labour to care that much. It doesn't make their radar ping these kind of headlines, these kind of stories. They simply don't recognise some of these harrowing statistics. And looking at the temperatures as well, over the course of the next week, we're going to be looking at the mid-20s for the next 7 to 10 days down there on the south coast. This is prime meteorological conditions for people to come over on boats. So the amount we've seen so far this year, and we know the numbers, 15,000 so far, that's up 42%, despite, by the way, giving £500 million to France. We haven't even factored that into this grim equation. Then the cost of all the border force. So stand by for these numbers to be even bigger this time next week. Let's, Candice, look at this story. The policing budget will get a real terms increase in each of the next 3 years. Rachel Reeves claims it will boost tackling crime. I've got a funny feeling that when we hear what these numbers are by Wednesday, every police officer who speaks on these issues will come out and say this doesn't touch the sides.
No, but I must say, what the policing leaders came out with the other day, Mark Rowley, said unless we get a bigger budget, we're going to choose to ignore to solve some crimes. I mean, they've gotten overmighty. I really do think so. The police have gotten overmighty. They don't get to choose which laws they enforce, although I suppose they do, right? Because we all know that things like thefts, burglaries, muggings, they're not solved properly. But we know they spend a lot of time on social media. They do. They spend time on social media, policing, arresting people for tweets that have 25 views. That's what they're prioritising, and we know that. And I just think that what we're getting now is politicised policing. They've gotten too big for their boots. Peter Hitchens said this recently in a Daily Mail column. He said they've gotten too big for their boots and they need to be put back in their place.
Yeah, we need to get all of that side of things. The social media thing, somebody needs to settle this once and for all so that we can lose the grey areas. I think there's been a bit of a shock to the system recently. We've had people jailed for tweets, not very nice tweets, in some cases utterly appalling tweets. I'm just not sure 31 months in prison is what you do with somebody who's done that. So you've got that, parents having their door knocked in, a former copper being cuffed and taken into custody because of something he didn't actually say on social media, as it turns out. I'd like to think there's a corner being turned. I'm not holding my breath here, but I'd like to think that somewhere within this conversation, which has been very high profile in the last 10, 12 months, will garner some kind of change so that the police can get on with what they're doing, because they make a reasonable point. If it was about tackling real crime, we've got Ed Miliband's sort of pet projects where we've got £13 billion being spent on green schemes and initiatives, most of which is, like, at best debatable. Some of it is clearly iffy. And other elements of it defy the rules of basic science or even common sense. So if there's 13 billion quid in the pot, Candice, I'd rather that was spent on tackling proper crime.
Well, I hope so, as long as it does serve those priorities, which is, I think, what everyone wants. But what I do worry about is the police see themselves as being there to get on top of views which they personally may find abhorrent, and they've lost the value of free speech. I mean, you look at Lucy Connolly. I mean, they've released information about her police interview saying she'd made racist statements in their opinion. I mean, she'd been talking about immigration, but in their opinion, she was a racist. And I'm sorry, I don't want the police commenting on that. They are not there to make value judgments about people's thoughts. That's the one thing that worries me, though. I mean, they may get more money, but institutionally, what do they see their priorities as? What do they believe their role in society? And I do worry that they think that they're there to manage our thoughts, to manage our speech. It's Orwellian. It's really Orwellian.
100%. Candice, stay with us. Lots more still to come. Candice Holdsworth is with us. We'll talk Greta Thunberg in a second. She's been cuffed as well, possibly chained to a radiator somewhere out there at the moment. Her flotilla was taken to one side and those on it removed. More on that story as well. Dawn French apologising for the most... Is it unbelievable in that kind of world of sort of the arty-farty lovey brigade who just simply wouldn't see the reality of a story if it smacked them in the chops? And troops being deployed in LA. All of this to come. And we're talking illegal migration here. How bad does it have to get? You've seen the numbers. You've heard the equivalencies. What's going on at the moment is anybody's guess. Is anybody seriously trying to solve it? Probably not. I find that extraordinary. I find it criminal. In fact, how bad does it have to get? 0344 499 1000.
Talk about tone deaf and a lack of self-awareness. To say that she's been kidnapped while she's trying to deliver supplies into Hamas-held territory, where Hamas is holding 55 hostages, is just a complete lack of self-awareness and shows how disconnected these activists are from reality. It was a pathetic publicity stunt. They tried to make Israel look bad, and instead Israel has distributed an image of Greta looking longingly at an Israeli soldier, giving her a pastrami sandwich in a plastic wrapper. I think it's a fitting ending.
UK. On DAB+. On your smart speaker. On your smart TV. And on your side. This is Talk.
One in from Terry in Slough. Afternoon, Terry says, I'm 76. In my opinion, both Labour and the Tories seem to care more about asylum seekers and illegal immigrants than about the British people. Well, it's bang on, Terry. You're correct. When you look at some of what has been happening in the budget last time around, whether it's tax hikes for working people, I think most people at some level have experienced that. Might not be a rise in income tax, but changing of the thresholds, etc. Winter fuel payments removed, now being reinstated to most but not all. And of course, areas such as disability. We're all up for the idea of keeping your eye on how benefits are spent. But I think the bigger eyeball right now should be on the fact that we learned today that the amount we spend on asylum hotels, £41,000 a year per person, is the equivalent of 600,000 workers. 600,000 workers. The population of Manchester, essentially. Taking every penny of tax from that lot to finance that lot. Unbelievable. How bad does it have to get? Candice Holdsworth is with us, the writer and the broadcaster. Let's move to this one then, Candice. Israeli drones sprayed a white irritant substance on Greta Thunberg's Gaza-bound aid boat before boarding and detained her and 11 activists. They are allegedly being taken by Israeli forces to watch a video of the horrors of October the 7th. Let's have a listen, though, to what little Greta had to say.
My name is Greta Thunberg and I am from Sweden. If you see this video, we have been intercepted and kidnapped in international waters by the Israeli occupational forces or forces that support Israel. I urge all my friends, family and comrades to put pressure on the Swedish government to release me and the others as soon as possible.
Yeah, sort of giving herself kind of hostage status there, Candice, it seems.
Yeah, no, she looks terrified. She looks terrified, absolutely terrified. You know, this little lost little girl shtick isn't going to wash anymore. You know, one of the people that she was on that ship with, I mean, he's been filmed chanting jihadist slogans, saying death to America, death to Israel.
Yep.
I mean, he was at the funeral of Nasrallah. I mean, this guy is like, if he's not a jihadi, he's jihadi adjacent. I mean, these are the people she's palling around with now. Is she a useful idiot, or does she know what she's doing? And she should, by the way, find out what happened to the Jews of Lebanon as well, what Hezbollah did to them. They murdered them, they kidnapped them, they drove them out of the country. I mean, it's deeply anti-Semitic. I mean, Israel has called her deeply anti-Semitic. I wonder if she is, I don't know. If she sees the October 7th massacres, I wonder what she'll think of them. I wonder if she'll actually have sympathy for those people, or if she'll just deny it and say it's all a lie.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because people like Greta, as we were talking in the first section about how people from certain parts of the political spectrum simply don't see things. I mean, they really don't see things. I don't dispute that when people like her and her ilk say, no, this is like David and Goliath stuff. It's like, hang on a second, the only democracy in that region, Israel, a first world country, an ally, who's up against a medieval death cult, whose list of abuses over the years, and not just abuses as in things they've got away with, things they still actually believe in. It's that group against that group. But you would never get somebody like Greta to be able to understand that. She wouldn't get the premise in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, what they're dealing with is deeply anti-civilizational forces. I mean, that's what October 7th was. I mean, it was a complete break from civilization. I mean, it was unimaginable brutality. If you've seen those videos, the images of which have just seared me for the rest of my life. You know, it's sort of what you could imagine happened during World War II. But a lot of that wasn't caught on camera, right? I mean, people were murdered in the most brutal ways and we never saw. Yep. This still was, but because anti-Semitism is still a force in society, people will always deny it. They will deny it, and they will not allow the thought that Jews could suffer in any way, because they want them to be evil. That's what they think. I mean, this is what the demonization of Israel is.
I saw somebody, I can't remember who it was, did the rounds on social media recently. It was I think it's a kind of Middle Eastern guy who made the point. I know that's quite a general term, but you take the point. About trying to work out what free Palestine actually means, because you could take you could take Israel out of the equation altogether. The idea there's a free Palestine that's going to be left there for everybody to enjoy is nonsense. Nowhere in that neck of the woods. The only place that's free is Israel. Everywhere else, even if you get into places like Egypt, which are a little better but not perfect, none of these areas are free. They're mostly horrendous hellholes that nobody in their right mind would want to live in. So, let's quit with this sanctimonious free Palestine stuff, because there is no such thing. And I tell you another person, Candice, that needs a bit of a lesson in this. Dawn French, the alleged comedian, has now apologised after she posted that video which seemed to mock the events of October the 7th. I mean, this is just a great example of what it perfectly crystallises what we're talking about. Let's have a listen to the original video she posted.
Complicated. No, but nuanced. But, bottom line is no. Yeah, but, they did a bad thing to us. I mean, I don't know. Yeah, but no. But we want that land, and we don't know, there's a lot of history, and we've got, no.
I mean, sorry, but what an arse. I mean, seriously, Candice. I mean, 1,200 people raped, killed, brutalised, murdered. Is that not enough? That was a little bad thing, according to Dawn French.
She looked deranged in that video. I mean, she looked absolutely deranged. I mean, there was something wrong with her. I mean, it just goes to show how much these people rely on others behind the scenes to make them look sane, throughout her career. When she does her own thing, this is what she comes out with. I wonder if she knows anything about October 7th. I mean, to call it a bad thing like that. Does she know what happened? I really don't think people know quite what happened. I mean, sometimes I'll speak to people and they're very critical of of what Israel's doing in Gaza. Fine, they're allowed to have that view. But when you ask them, for instance, about the Bibas children, what happened to them, they don't know who they are. They actually don't know. I mean, many people who, are engaged in the subject will know exactly who they are, but so many people don't. They don't know what happened to those families. And I just, people on the left like to say, educate yourself. Dawn French should educate herself. But I also think in many ways, she represents what has happened to the West. I mean, there's this sort of very self-hatred. Because when you think about it, terrible atrocities have happened here, right? I mean, there have been, terrorists and jihadis have just willfully murdered people. Here, France, all over Europe. But people were never allowed to express their legitimate anger about it. I mean, you actually, you're always told, don't look back in anger. So when the Israelis defend themselves and defend their civilization, people like Dawn French, they just can't understand it because they don't have that urge themselves. They are suicidal in many ways.
You're spot on. As ever, Candice, we hit the clock, sadly, but thank you for joining us, Candice Holdsworth, the writer and the broadcaster. We'll take your comments on any of these stories. There is a lot out there this morning, or this afternoon even, to tuck into, particularly that question we began with at the beginning about illegal immigration. When you look at the numbers, you crunch the numbers, you realise how much money is being spent. It's taxpayers' money and where it's going, and the sheer eye-watering, jaw-dropping numbers and what its equivalencies are, how it could be spent, who's coughing up, i.e., well, you and me. You have to ask the question, how bad does it have to get? Seriously, how bad would it have to get before the government goes, you know what, we're not going to do this anymore. I'm sorry, we're going to have to find an alternative to this. I mean, the hotel thing, the amount of disruption, it's not just financial, it's social as well. Even if people are behaving themselves, you suddenly stick 300-400 young 23-year-olds into a small town or village, then you're likely to get some tensions on. Nothing about it works. So how bad would it have to be before somebody somewhere took some level of action? 0344 499 1000. We'll talk to two voices on this in just a moment. Right now, it's 1:30. This is Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Sue says the money the government has given to France could pay for a Nightingale-style detention centre on a remote part of the British Isles. Australia succeeded in doing this. I don't think anybody wants, nobody wants to abuse anybody or stick somebody in a hole in the ground and go, well, you came here, so now you're going to suffer. I don't know any reasonable person that thinks that. But there has to be a better way than the one we currently have. And there has to be one that's not costing 4.7 billion quid every year to house people in hotels and provide their care on top of that. And this cost, listen to how these numbers were crunched. This is Jamie Jenkins, the statistician we regularly have on the programme. He was on Talk earlier today with Mike. The cost takes every penny of tax from nearly 600,000 workers. That's the equivalent, roughly, to the entire population of Manchester. Latest figures, of course, show there are 32,000 asylum seekers currently staying in 210 hotels. There are others staying in other forms of accommodation. And it comes as corrupt legal advisors are said to be charging up to £22,000 to create fake skilled jobs for migrants, with fears the loophole could be worse than the small boat crisis. I don't have any truck in believing that could be the case. In a moment, we'll speak to Callum McGoldrick, researcher at the Taxpayers Alliance. First, Ivan Sampson, immigration lawyer. Ivan, good afternoon to you. You know, we've spoken many times over the years. You're always a fairly sensible voice in this discussion, but surely from any perspective, left wing, right wing, somewhere in the middle, economist, non-economist, sociologist, non-sociologist, everybody could agree that this figure is unacceptable. Can you hear us, Ivan?
I can. It is unacceptable, absolutely right. But you have to remember, hotels are only booked when the government doesn't have adequate accommodation that is provided for asylum seekers. And let's be clear about it. The law says, the Refugee Convention and our local domestic law puts a legal obligation on the government to provide basic housing, and quite often it's shared. And also, asylum seekers don't get a choice of where they live. They could be sent from Land's End to John O'Groats. And also, the money they get for food, toiletries is £49 a week. So they're not actually paid from welfare benefits. They're paid by the Home Office. Even local councils don't pay them.
OK, so, I mean, there's a lot in there. I think a lot of people would say, well, hang on, you're getting accommodation you don't need for anything. You get £49 a week. But I think, and I hope you can still hear me, Ivan, wasn't the first point you raised, which I thought was interesting, you know, all the refugee conventions, domestic, international, whatever they happen to be. That's where the problem is, isn't it? We've not yet successfully managed to redefine and update what a refugee might be. And in the 21st century, a refugee could very easily, and in these cases, I happen to believe more probably, be people who just want to change their life. You know, I live in a place I think's a bit rotten. I don't like the government. The world is small. Social media tells me stuff that I couldn't have even dreamt of a decade or two ago. I'm going to give it a go. I've got a few quid. The family have helped me out. I'm off to Calais to get on a boat. That's not really recognised, is it? Anyone that comes across on a boat is immediately clumped into the same category as somebody who escaped Nazi Germany back in the day.
Well, I agree with you to some extent, because the Refugee Convention, when it was enacted, or the international treaty was agreed upon, drafted by British lawyers, I might say, was in the aftermath of the Holocaust. That's what really brought about the refugee. And it was really meant for political refugees, or in that case, genocide, where they couldn't get protection.
Yeah.
It's not meant for economic migrants, but unfortunately, a number of people coming across the channel are economic migrants, but they're coming from countries which are in conflict. and there's no prospect of sending these people back to those countries.
That doesn't mean that every one of those countries is inhabitable,
here,
though, of course.
No, not at all. But, you know, people coming from, let's just say, Yemen or from Syria, the grant rate's 90% from those countries.
So what do we do then? How do we begin to address this? Because, you know, I was watching something recently. There was a Channel 4 documentary about various people. Chloe Dobbs, who appears on this programme quite regularly, was one of those that went over there. They were chatting to some people in the queue who were trying to get to the UK. You know, one guy said, you know, I used to sell mobile phones in Syria. I'd like to do something similar when I get to the UK. Now, that's fine. This wasn't a man that wants to come over and rape anybody or kill anybody. He wasn't thinking of sponging. He wanted a job. I don't think we're desperately in need of people to flog mobile phones. I would suggest he was a classic case of a bloke that understandably wanted to change his life, but he would never be sent back to Syria, as you rightly say.
That's right. Look, the only way we're going to stop the channel crossings is for the French to do so. Now, they could do so. They could do so tomorrow if they wanted. They don't want the EU, I believe that. But also there's no legal footing for them to do that. We've got this agreement with them. We paid them £500 million with absolutely no obligation to do anything. So there's always has to be a carrot and a stick for this. And the only way we're going to get the stick is to have a convention treaty with the EU that we can take France to the courts so they can be fined for not fulfilling their obligations.
That's a great point. Can I just ask you, Ivan, your line is not the best. It keeps cracking up on us. But just as and there's no way any of us know the answer to this fully, but your own educated guess as a lawyer in this area. 32,000 people have made that crossing this year alone. We know there's been tens of thousands over the previous years. What a percentage of that 32,000 would you imagine are literally escaping a war zone or a tyrannical regime to the point that their life is in danger?
Well, look, the Home Office, we can only look at the Home Office figures, and the grant rate is around 50 to 60% of that number are granted asylum. And let me tell you, the Home Office are not the refugee friends, that they look at these very critically, each application. So these are genuine refugees under the convention, but the remainder are not. And on top of that, we can't do anything about them because we can't send them back to the countries where they come from. So then either we let them live on the streets, which I don't know if you've been to Ireland recently, but there's tented villages in Ireland of refugees living on the streets. We don't have that here. Now, either we do that and say, right, off you go and fend for yourself, or we support them, and we're deciding to support them.
Ivan, on that point, thank you. Ivan Sampson, the immigration lawyer. We'll let you answer your phone as well, probably your broadband provider. Let's speak to Callum McGoldrick, researcher at the Taxpayers Alliance. Callum, good afternoon to you, sir.
Hello, Ian. Thank you for having me.
It's interesting. We crunched these numbers in various ways over the years. I thought the way that Jamie Jenkins has looked at this in the research that he did is a very powerful one. It's not mischief. It's not tabloid. It's genuine, nearly the equivalent of nearly taking the tax of nearly 600,000 people to pay for 32,000 people to be stuck in 210 hotels. That's the equivalent of the entire population of Manchester financing all of it.
Well, yeah, it's something that, particularly under this government, is going to feel like a massive kick in the teeth to every taxpayer. They seem to be going after every single cash grab they have, whether it's raising taxes on farmers, whether it's raising other inheritance taxes, you know, whether it's trying to scrap them into fuel payment and then rapidly bring it back. It seems that they have a massive expenditure area here that's deeply unpopular that they don't seem to want to be tackling.
Well, is there an answer to this? You know, financially, when you look at the way taxpayers finance stuff, and we could be here all day making lists that would make most people weep, as you well know, Callum, because this is the sphere you are in. But this is particularly profound. The amounts of money, it's jaw-dropping, and clearly, looking at the direction of travel, those numbers are going to get bigger over the next few months.
It is. It's something that is obviously very difficult for a government to tackle. The last government failed with it too, and they seem to be taking quite different approaches. I think it's one that they have to be a bit bolder on. They have to accept that we've left the European Union now. Parliament is sovereign once again, and they do have the ability to pass laws on a simple majority of MPs. Keir Starmer and the Labour government have such a massive majority. If they really wanted to, they could solve this problem.
How do you think they could do that? Because, you know, our last guest was saying, well, there's all these conventions and, you know, you can't just send people back to Syria. I did suggest, well, maybe the definition of what a refugee is, or someone claiming to be a refugee, probably needs updating in the 21st century.
100%. That has to be part of it. I think the crux of the issue is that there's a catch-all approach, it seems, to how the laws are written, and it's something that is drastically outdated. You know, as you said, a lot of these people we're finding are not coming from the most dangerous countries in the world. They're coming from poor countries, and they're economic migrants.
Even if you come from Iran, I mean, it's not a nice place. I wouldn't want to live there, but, you know, we're not at war with Iran right now. It's never been, you know, we're not exactly best mates, but nonetheless, it's not a shopping list, is it, looking for asylum? You can't just go, oh, I think I'll go for that country over there. It doesn't work like that.
Well, exactly. An immigration policy has to benefit the country that is receiving the immigrants. That's what the population here would want, is what British people would want. And you think, yeah, sure, okay, as the example given in your last segment about the Syrian phone salesman, is that that's not exactly who we need. So, okay, Syria's not the nicest country to live in, but you're not, you're not in such danger as you would class as a refugee in most cases.
And even if, you know, Ivan Sampson, the immigration lawyer, Callum, said, you know, 50 to 60% are given the green light, and we could explore that figure as well. But let's say, you know, 40%, based on what he was suggesting, don't get given asylum. That doesn't mean, of course, they immediately get ejected from the country. They could be hanging around for years.
No, and we know that a lot of them abscond as well. The enforcement on it's not particularly great, as in you might get a letter from a court saying you have to show up on this date at this hearing. If you don't go, then, you know, what mechanism is there to actually get these people? How do we even know where they are? You know, it's not particularly clear how good we are even enforcing that.
Indeed. Callum, thank you for your time. Callum McGoldrick, researcher at the Taxpayers Alliance. It's an absolute flipping mess out there at the moment. The one thing I can never, and I know this is the most obvious point in all of this, and I always make the analogy that, you know, if a load of people jumped over the barriers at Heathrow, it will be the biggest story in the world. But if you do it in a boat in the Channel, nobody seems to blink these days. But I do find it should irk anyone. If you look at how stringent passport control is, and anyone who's ever had an iffy moment because their passport's either run out or the date's slightly wrong, or I don't know, someone questions the photograph, whatever it happens to be, you'll know just how serious, both here and pretty much any border force in the civilized world, how serious they take that stuff. It's huge. It's game-changing. You know, people, every week there are people that don't get to go on holiday because there was just something a little bit wrong with their paperwork. Could have been their passport, visa, something like that. You don't fill in your visa form. Man alive, yeah, you don't get that right. All hell breaks loose. That's it. You're person non grata. And yet a 23-year-old young man can float over on a boat. I mean, whilst I appreciate the repetitive nature of that analogy, it is worth continuing to dwell on it for a moment. This is meant to be, you know, about security. If you told your mates in the pub, oh, my passport was one day out of date, nobody would have any sympathy. They'd go, well, it's your own stupid fault then, isn't it? You know, what are they going to do? Just let anyone in without a passport? That would be mental. And yet that's precisely what we do every single day down there in Dover. How bad does it have to get? 0344 499 1000.
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Let's go to your calls. 10 to 2. This will be Liam in Plymouth. Liam, how you doing?
How you doing, Ian? You all right, mate?
Very good, thanks. Yeah, what are your thoughts?
On about the migrant crisis.
Yeah.
What you think it's going to take to make a change?
Yeah, how bad does it have to get?
I do believe it's going to take like one more migrant or somebody that shouldn't be here in this country to commit a serious crime, and then I unfortunately think it's going to become like civil unrest within the country.
Yeah.
I think the British people are starting to become seriously worried about who is in the country and what threat they could pose to us. I mean, like when that, like a couple of weeks ago, unfortunately, when that car drove through the streets of Liverpool, it was almost as if the identity of the perpetrator was more important than the actual incident itself. I just think that the tensions are starting to bubble and the government don't seem to be really interested or listening. But I think unfortunately, it's going to come to riots and civil unrest before anything's seriously done. Unfortunately.
Do you think, I mean, at the moment, and I certainly don't say this as a defence, because clearly after everything I've just been saying for the last hour, I wouldn't be in that place. But a lot of people would say, well, actually, we haven't really had an example of specifically one of the people on the boat committing a terrible atrocity. There's lots of hearsay about what might have happened in, with migrants around hotels, and, there's clearly some level of criminality, as there would be in any big number of people. But that big event that you're referring to, we've not yet seen that.
No, it's just like the Southport, and that is like, obviously, it's like, it's just, if somebody shouldn't be here in this country, and then they then commit a serious crime, it's like, well, the government haven't done their job on protecting the citizens of the country.
Yeah.
So it's like, I don't blame anybody for wanting to better their lives and come to England. Sure. It's like many of us English people, we enjoy going to Australia and going to live and work out in Australia.
Yeah.
But I do strongly believe that if you enter a different country and want to work or live there or even seek asylum, you should have to come the legal route and provide all your relevant documents. And then I also think if you break into a country illegally, you should be detained, sent back. But then I also think if you then come again to this country illegally, you should then find yourself in prison for 20 years.
I would say that 100%. Although that in itself is quite a cost, isn't it, that you've got to add in. But listen, I get it. Liam, thank you very much indeed for that. I think, look, the game that the government's got to play is by going, look, we're not going to stick people in, a tent somewhere in the middle of winter in a field in Argyll. We won't do that, but we will have something that is a detention-based centre. If you're coming to this country in the same way that, to go back to the Heathrow analogy, if I jumped the bars at Heathrow Airport without any documentation, I would be spending time in a prison cell. If they couldn't establish anything about my background, I'd probably end up in Belmarsh on suspicion of something because they weren't able to work out who I was. Alternatively, I can come on a boat from Calais when absolutely none of that will happen, and I'll end up in the Four Seasons with 50 quid a week and 3 meals a day. I mean, that's not hyperbole to say that. That's literally the situation as it currently is. Colette is in Southport on this issue. Colette, what have you got for us? Good afternoon.
Oh, good afternoon. You have to excuse me, I'm losing my voice.
All right.
I think the way it'll stop is when all the government officials, civil servants, the blob, the lawyers stop getting their wages, stop getting their salary. When they come along and say we are that desperate for money, you'll all have to have a cut. Yeah. Believe me, it stopped them overnight.
It's interesting that, isn't it? All of those people that are clearly not doing enough, if there was a penalty for those people, would that be the answer?
No, well, personally, I think so.
But also, would it also be the answer, though, do you think, Colette, if it was just made, and I don't mean I don't want to, like I said, I don't want to put anybody in a hole in the ground. But if you made it very deep, France have literally made this point. If it was deeply unattractive to come here, you wouldn't want to make the journey, right?
Of course not. Of course not.
Nobody would.
They know. They know as soon as they wake up in the morning, wherever they are, they've got 20-mile walk on a boat, and they're going to go to the lap of luxury, where people in this country, especially veterans, I feel desperately sorry for them.
Yeah.
Sleeping in. I live in Southport, and you see them in the doorways.
I know. I mean, this should not be happening in the 21st century. And down the road in a hotel, you've got people who are nice and warm and cosy, and they're safe, and they get £50, and you know, there's medical treatment if they need it.
Excuse me, I just quickly. I had to run out to get something from one of the shops. They didn't have it. This was about half 8 at night. So I drove through Southport to go to Morrison's, and I couldn't believe what they were saying. There was 2 pyjama pants on outside the hotel on Main Street on Lord Street, peeing in the gutter.
Nice.
I'm driving, I nearly crashed my car. Oh my God.
That would be a terrible story to tell your insurance company, wouldn't it, if you did crash it? What happened? Well, there were these 2 guys piddling in a bush. Yeah. Colette, thank you very much indeed for that. I want to get another word in from Dave in London. Dave, what are your thoughts? Hi.
Hi, Ian. I don't think this is about the physical crime from one of your last callers or piddling in the bushes. It's the economic crime that's going on. The cost of this is more than the winter fuel payments, the VAT on private schools, the inheritance tax on farmers. And so the bill we're racking up to cover this is impacting our way of life by the things the government is starting to cancel or get rid of.
100%. Even if I was
got this bill.
Yeah, I was going to say, even if every single migrant that came here was determined to work eventually, was causing no problem, they weren't peeing in any bushes, they weren't accused of any sort of local crime in any shape or form, perfect human beings, even if that was the case, we're still left with the irredeemable reality, Dave, which you've just raised, is costing £5 billion a year.
Yeah, well, plus all the other stuff as well, because then you have all the pressure on the public services, housing, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and they're knock-on effects that aren't factored into this.
Right, and although we would like lots of doctors to all come over because they all earn $100,000 a year, although why we would want to deprive other countries of their top doctors, I don't know.
That's also an issue.
You're not talking of people coming in that are going to be earning 35, 40, 50, 60 grand a year, right? Yeah. I mean, it's just not going to happen. So it's just economically insane what we're doing. And then when you take all the money we're paying for lawyers, legal aid, translation, I bet you when someone does a real cost of this, you're going to be looking in the 30, 40, 50 billion a year.
It would be incredible. And you're right, the biggest factor that you've raised there, Dave, correctly so, was that of housing as well. Because remember, we are talking about the amount of migrants that have been stuffed into hotels, 32,345 in 201 hotels. There are many others that are actually just in houses. And there's a knock-on effect of that, a shortage of housing. Remember, it was only recently they were saying to landlords, you know, if you've got space, we'll guarantee you rents for 5 years because we need to put these people somewhere. Really? Is that literally, in the 21st century, the only answer to this question? Len says, if 100 years ago, if a government treated illegal migrants entering the UK far better than its own citizens, it would be kicked out for treachery. Well, that could still happen, of course, Len. You never know. Watch this space. You might have to wait till 2029, but there's a real probability that something like that could take place. Our lines remain open. 0344 499 1000. Let's get the news at 2 o'clock.
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk, everything you need to know and all the breaking news right here on Talk. 3 minutes, or coming up on 3 minutes after 2 o'clock. We've been debating this one. Britain spending a staggering 4.7 billion quid a year to house and care for migrants, the cost equal to the income tax paid by nearly 600,000 people, roughly the population of Manchester. You can't write this kind of stuff. It's now beyond satire. We'll continue to ask that question. When it comes to illegal immigration, how bad does it have to get? How bad has it got to get before somebody says, sorry, no, we've got to do this a different way? Also this afternoon, 9 million pensioners will get the winter fuel payment this year after a humiliating U-turn by Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, who's now extended the benefit to anyone with a pension income below £35,000. So my mother-in-law gets hers back, so there's a good start. Many others won't get theirs. Rachel Reeves will be saying, now the economy is doing better, we can afford... Oh, get in the bin, that's nonsense. You got embarrassed, in fact, you got shamed on this one. And people will not forget Rachel. And Tory leader Kemi Badenoch says employers should be allowed to ban burqas at work, and has also slammed Sharia courts and cousin marriage as barriers to integration. Absolutely none of this stuff should be going on. Absolutely none of this stuff should be going on in the United Kingdom. End of. That's it. Simple. Bang. You could stop that by one swift movement of the quill. Everything would be gone. Details on the way. Right now, it's 3 minutes after, coming up on 4 minutes after 2 o'clock. More comment from you. David in Essex says, given the UK government has admitted they were wrong on the winter fuel payment and have subsequently U-turned, shouldn't there be a back payment for last winter for those that didn't receive it? Yeah, because it had come in by then, hadn't it? Yeah, it had. Good point. I'm sure, you wait, there's somebody somewhere. Are you a pensioner that didn't get your winter? You can hear the ads already. Andy in Morecambe says, regarding Dawn French, I wonder what Marks and Spencer are going to do because of their Jewish founders' history. Great show. Does she advertise for M&S? I'm assuming based on that she does. Sue says, I think I read Sue's. Sally says, illegal and legal migration was too much years ago. Nobody wants it. I don't want to pay to live like this. It's already bad and our country and culture is lost. And I'm frankly scared and stressed every day. My partner and I have already been on a fact-finding trip to emigrate in our retirement. It's quite interesting if you're forced to find yourself to do that. Where do you go? Where's the best place to have a little gander and go, do you know what, that's a... Few people going off to Dubai, and not everybody who's got a few... You've got to have a certain amount of money, haven't you? You can't just turn up in Dubai. But as long as you've satisfied the system, nice weather, in fact, slightly too hot, I think we'd all agree. Let's go to more of your calls and comments in a few moments. In the meantime, Alan Tolhurst is with us, chief reporter at Politics Home. Alan, good afternoon to you.
Afternoon.
Nice to have you with us. It's worth starting, of course, with that big story, just the amount of money spent on housing and supporting migrants. I said at the beginning, I don't think it matters whether you're left-wing, right-wing, somewhere in the middle, Tory, Labour, Lib Dem, anyone. Surely we can all collectively agree that this is unacceptable and it has to stop.
Yeah, completely. And it's where this government is definitely found itself floundering, having had really tough talk about how, disgraceful, how bad the hotel bill had got under the previous government. They've not been able to reduce it. And I feel like you and I speak almost every week about this inability to make big dramatic changes to the system that they inherited. Like they've made some tweaks, they've tweaked around the edges, they've done some various things, but nothing really has been able to alter the fundamental facts behind it, essentially, and they've not been able to do so, whether that's building more temporary accommodation, different ways of housing people, improving processing, rejecting claims, all this kind of stuff, returns agreements. It's not leading to the big change. And I think if you ask most people, is anything different now to what it was a year ago under the Conservatives, and I don't think anybody would really tell you that it was, certainly not for the better.
And France do, to be fair to the French, I mean, I know they've had £500 million and nobody can quite work out what came back as a result of that, but just putting that to one side, I mean, the French have constantly made the point that the way around this is to make your country less attractive.
Yeah, and actually there are other ways that they've all talked about perhaps having processing taking place in France rather than processing take place in the UK, because otherwise people basically have to get to the UK in order to do so, and that's why they're so desperate to get here by any means to then start that process. If that process happened before they left French shores, but the problem is that that would seem the French would never agree to it, because that would obviously put stuff on their doorstep, and also again it wouldn't deter people in quite the same way from still wanting to get here. And we know with what kind of percentage of claims are approved that it would still lead to quite high numbers. So there's lots of different solutions. None of them are really that palatable, really.
And Rishi Sunak, you may remember, of course, stood next to Macron, literally making that announcement. I think he was, a little bit kind of casual about it. We're hoping there'll be a processing unit. I think a little tear dropped from Macron's eye when he said that, 'cause I'm not sure that was in the script, but nonetheless, it was referenced. This is obviously a couple of years ago now, and nothing came of it.
No, and then lots of stuff, doesn't it? Like I said, because it's about what's practically possible, but also what's politically possible as well. And a lot of those solutions were not seen as very politically palatable to either side. So that's why a lot of stuff has been kind of gummed up. And a lot of those, you say that money that's been promised for things, needed one of the things. It needed the French to change some of their laws so that the French border officials could act differently. That's not taken place, whether that's due to kind of political pressures within the French government, all this kind of stuff. So there's lots of kind of issues essentially. It feels from the outside as though nothing's really happening, but it does feel as though there's lots of stuff that's been kind of gummed up by these various processes. Meanwhile, these figures continue to go up.
Let's move to this story. Obviously, from a journalist perspective, we all love a U-turn story, and I do feel sorry for some politicians when they haven't really done a U-turn. They've just kind of reverted to what they were always going to do. It was never a U-turn, and it was, or they've added some additional policy, etc. This, however, the winter fuel allowance is literally the dictionary definition of a U-turn, right? I mean, they don't come any more crystal clear than this one, Alan.
Yeah, I think in my sort of big political book of U-turns, this one is up there with kind of the definition of so, but it's not been, I don't think, the most artfully done. It's more of a kind of, it's not a very smooth U-turn. It's been quite a creaking sort of 7, 8, 9 point kind of turn to get round to this position. And it's been quite unedifying for the Chancellor, who obviously, one of the big, probably the first big announcement this government made last year was the winter fuel. It was kind of the big economic policy they had long time until the budget came, and it became synonymous with what this government was doing economically. So to now have to reverse on the one policy that if you ask someone on the street they would knew this Rachel Reeves for, is that she's reversing on it. It's very tricky, and obviously she doesn't want to apologise for it, and it is going to make a big difference. But the whole point was that the signal, it was a signal of intent from this government that they were going to take this money away. It was a difficult decision to do so, but it had to be done for the state of the finances, and then having to then bring it back for 9 million people, it's a tricky one to have to do. I think they're hoping that it will get kind of, that it'll, when we get the spending review on Wednesday, there'll be lots more news, lots more good news, positive news about investment and higher spending on things like health and that kind of stuff, that it'll kind of get missed. But for a lot of people, I don't think they'll forget or perhaps forgive this government for what it did last winter.
Yeah, and there was this sort of rather uncomfortable, rather daft moment at the dispatch box when the Prime Minister said, well, now that the economy is looking better, we can do this. And it's like, well, I mean, it was such a silly thing to say, because it didn't happen for that reason. Firstly, the decision only happened half an hour ago. Nothing spectacular had happened to the economy where they suddenly found all this extra money. So there was that. But I suppose governments are in a difficult position, because could they ever stand up, Alan, whether it was Rachel Reeves or Keir Starmer, and go, do you know what? We got this wrong. Because politicians don't like doing that, and every advisor that sits around them, as you know better than me, would urge them never to say that, because it's like a death knell if you start conceding in that respect. But that's essentially what happened, and that's, I think many people would quite like to hear that.
Yeah, and you often have these conversations where it goes round and round, like, well, actually, people just respect a bit of honesty. People make mistakes. In other areas, in business, in sport, in culture, people do admit to mistakes, and things change and change the way they operate. And it doesn't, the world doesn't end when that happens. But yeah, you're right. In politics, people are deathly allergic to just simply saying we got this wrong. The one I can remember. Nick Clegg on tuition fees. He said that's that I'm sorry thing. It got parodied into a song. It became a meme. This is the thing. If you do admit defeat, if you do kind of do that, then it does kind of get held against you for years afterwards, which is why I think people are so against it. But you're right, because we all know that they got it wrong. They're effectively telling us they got it wrong by the way they're changing it, but they can't say those specific words. They won't use that formulation, and I think that probably does rankle people, because in any other, like I said, in another walk of life, you'd expect someone to apologize when they do make that mistake and turn things around. So it's a tricky one to do, and people do suggest it, but no one really is willing to go through with that kind of form of political communication.
The Nick Clegg thing I thought was really interesting, because he had a very easy answer to that. It's like, we're not in government on our own. We're in a coalition. There's nothing I can do to change that. So, and I thought that would have been completely, demonstrably true and very easy to sell. I know a lot of Lib Dems, and they were crushed at the following election, of course, as a result. They've made some headway since, but what was he meant to do? They were a party that at the time had, 50-odd MPs. They got something like 70% of their manifesto into government, which was extraordinary. I said at the time, Nick Clegg should have been given Parliamentarian of the Year, frankly, but instead he could hardly go out anywhere in a Lib Dem territory over the student fee thing.
Yeah, and if you look at all those kind of places that they had won the 2005 and 2010 elections in university towns, they got creamed in all of those places in 2015, ended up with just sort of 8 MPs. So I think it's when things like that happen that I think that people then become more reticent about doing so in the future, because, if you do so badly afterwards, having admitted defeat, having said you're sorry and apologise, that's why people are unwilling to do so, because they think that it'll be used against you in eternity.
Yeah. And let's move to this story that involves graffiti and old trains. Now, I don't know how many people have ever travelled on the Bakerloo line, but if you've got a sensory issue, don't go on it. It's very loud. It looks like something that you'd find as a ride at Alton Towers, but it creaks, it cranks, it makes a loud noise. There's a lot of wood down there in those carriages, and it seems to have become a bit of a haven for graffiti artists to get down there, and they haven't just wrote, Jim was here. They've actually, properly plastered up these trains. It got so bad that a group led by a fellow called Joe Reeve filmed themselves cleaning the graffiti. They literally went down there with some spray that you can buy online called, I think, Graffiti Go or something like that, and wiped it off. You could have probably used a wet wipe and achieved a similar thing, but apparently this was beyond the ability of Sadiq Khan's TfL team, who'd let it stay like that forever, it seems.
Yeah, it's just actually really interesting. So the Bakerloo line has these very old trains. They've been in stock for about used stock for about 50 years. And a couple of years ago, TfL put in a request to try and get them to be replaced. And they've been delayed in terms of replacing this rolling stock on the line. And so one of the problems, I think, is that in order for it to properly clean these carriages, they take the trains out of service and do a deep clean on them. But because they haven't got enough stock, they aren't able to keep the line going and also take them off to clean them. So therefore, they're not being cleaned in the same way that the trains on other lines. And it's become a bit of a pitch battle between between TfL and the government over this kind of funding. And actually, my colleague at Paul Home, Adam Payne, was suggesting that one of the big things in the spending review is that Sadiq Khan's has been pushing for investment in things like new Bakerloo line extension and improving and getting new rolling stock. And the word is that the London Mayor might be disappointed in it. And if so, this will probably continue, because the Bakerloo line, until they get these new carriages, new trains, it's unlikely that we're going to see any improvement in it. And as I say, anyone who's gone down there knows that it's not the nicest line to travel across the capital in.
But I do wonder, Alan, whether somebody actually took a calculated decision when they were working out, what we're going to do with all this graffiti. We've got 27 carriages that are absolutely daubed in this stuff. Did somebody at the meeting go, hang on a second, it's the 21st century. People like clicks. Somebody somewhere at some point will get fed up with it. They'll go down with a wet rag and a spray, and they'll clear it off in an attempt to embarrass us. Actually, the joke will be on them, because we'll have the carriages cleaned. It could be as simple as that.
Well, I certainly don't think if you're TfL and you're pushing the government to give you the money to get new carriages, this story is definitely not a bad thing, is it? It kind of shows how necessary and how needed this new rolling stock is. So I don't think they'll be in City Hall. They'll probably be quietly a little bit pleased about this as we head into that spending review, because it kind of helps them make their case as to why it's needed. And we've seen kind of the problem that the government faces when people think that money is not being spent on the kind of public realm and that things are getting worse. And we know that kind of affects how people feel about the government. And so actually the money is well spent in that sense, but make people think that the government is trying to actually improve people's lives and make people's everyday lives better. So probably not too disheartened by this, although it does make them look a bit foolish on the outside.
Indeed. Alan, as ever, thank you for your time. Alan Tolhurst is Chief Reporter at Politics Home. Thank you to him. Over to you, 0344 499 1000. We are talking in particular, there's a load of stuff up and running. The Dawn French thing still rumbles on despite this ridiculous apology. I wasn't really referring to, I was just talking about leaders on both sides. No, you know what you were doing, Dawn. Come on, mate. Fess up. Just say you absolutely royally got it wrong and you are deeply sorry for the most seismic form of offence you could throw in the direction of a country that has had 1,200 of its citizens in one day brutally raped, murdered, set on fire, kidnapped, held. I mean, the list goes on. Remember, that's how it started. But don't let that stand in the way of some kind of arty character who wants to score a few points. You can comment on that. And, of course, the big question about asylum hotels and the cost of how bad does it have to get. We were bringing the detail of the £4.7 billion bill. That's every penny of tax from the equivalent of nearly 600,000 workers. So just think of it in those terms. 600,000 people go to work every day, and these aren't people in the highest paid jobs, every day for no other reason than to finance the bill, which is £41,000 per migrant, for those hotel stays. That's where we're at the moment. And apparently there's no other way around. There's no other options. Nobody can come up with we thought about it, we sat down a big meeting, can't really work it out. No other options. Meant to be the 21st century. We're meant to be, yes, we want to help people who are escaping a terrible regime. Most people genuinely now believe that isn't the group of people we're dealing with here. With Ukraine, people stepped up to the plate to help. When you get somebody who's come from Afghanistan, we understand that if you've got somebody who worked alongside our troops, translators and the like, we want to help. Hong Kong even, we want to help. Matey just hot-footing it from Eritrea or Iran, so Albania, sorry mate, that doesn't come under this category. But they've never updated the sort of status of what a refugee means in all the conventions. It sort of still suggests it's somebody who's escaped Nazi Germany. That's not what we're dealing with. Cope says, I drive past one of the hotels on my way to and from work. In the morning, there's a few standing around smoking, but by evening there are hundreds of them just loitering, smoking, drinking around the nearby Ladbrokes Bookies and Mini Casino. And that's what? What does that mean? Even if none of them are breaking the law, that's still not the point, right? Is that what a modern country is meant to look like? With 300 blokes piddling in bushes, smoking, drinking, whatever it is they're doing. Really? Maybe some people in government have a different idea of what the 21st century should look like. 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
Zia had been working 24/7, 7 days a week. And, you know, like all of us, sometimes you want to take too much on and you're just pushing on. And look, he was exhausted. He regrets, you know, his tweet. What Nigel's agreed with Zia is that he will focus on Doge. It is such a big opportunity to save money, to prove we can do it in these councils. I'm very focused on the pension side of it, where, again, there's huge sums to be saved. What we've got to show the good British people is that we can deliver.
These lawyers' costs are not included in this 4.7 billion, and the 4.7 billion figure, Mike, includes the hotel costs. It also includes the kind of the landlord accommodation that the likes of Serco will pay you 5 years, all your rent, all your kind of utilities and stuff. So it's a staggering amount of money. And as you point out there, so 600,000 people have to get up, go to work every single day, pay their taxes, because they earn on average, in the UK, it's about £38,000 a year. So obviously you earn that money, the government takes the tax.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Yvonne in Solihull says, Ian, since you asked about immigration, half of all 25-year-olds in Knoll and Solihull, West Midlands, have already gone to Australia. Wow. Wow, half of all 25-year-olds have legged it to Australia. Our son went a few weeks ago, says Yvonne. It's expensive, but has a good job, no degree or student debt to worry about. He commutes to work by boat in Sydney. The videos of the city trams and people is more old-style British than he imagined. Tells us yesterday he will never return to Birmingham or England. Such sadness we parents must bear, our only child. The only way around that, Yvonne, that kind of Victoria thing. In fact, if you go down to Melbourne, you'll find more of that. It's really interesting in some of the suburbs. There is that kind of Victorian vibe that is very much still there, and the place is all the richer for it, frankly. But yeah, you'll have to go over there, Yvonne. Do your thing. Get over to Australia, do a bit of down under detail, and never return. Don't do New Zealand with this. There's literally nothing there, all right? It's not worth your trouble. Joanna in Salisbury says, Dawn French didn't U-turn with an apology because she was sorry. She saw money disappearing out the door. Nothing as good as ideology hitting you in the pocket. Yeah, there must have been a point where someone went, mate, you might want to get that down. Too late now. It's the 21st century, social media. No one forgets. This will be Andrew in Hertfordshire on migration. Andrew, afternoon to you.
Good afternoon. Yeah, remember the internet keeps receipts, doesn't it, Ian?
Every time, yeah. It's funny that, isn't it? When you really stop and think about it, that anything anyone's ever said or put up online will never go away.
Yeah, and you know, the only thing that stops it being in New Zealand in 15 seconds is the curvature of the Earth and the speed of electricity.
There it is. It's that simple,
Ian,
right?
Yeah. The great tragedy in all this is that if you look at the tragic circumstances of the Lee Rigby murder, you look at the awful scenario and people that we've lost at the Notting Hill Carnival, nothing changes because it's not bad enough. And we've had migrants die on boats and drown. It's still not enough. So we're staring down a huge tragedy. And we will come on, we'll have a call, and it will be a lot of I told you so. And it will be, statistically, it will be death, it will be either a murder or an incident like that. And then the country's in it's in a difficult place because we've tried vigilantism, you know, the whole Stockport thing, that
Sure.
went wrong. The courts jumped on that, and quite rightly so. But what is left for the government, and the only thing you can do is, if you look at what Trump did initially, they took anything that was South American, shaved it, put it on a plane, and did big publicity around it.
Yep.
So the only thing the government can do is shut everything down and go to that level. Book Guantanamo Bay, anything that's mail that comes over, stopped, shaved, in a jumpsuit, out to Guantanamo. That's the only thing we're left with now. Nothing else is working. They've beaten the system. The system has broken down. We have to go completely polar opposite now and really push back.
But the problem, I was just going to say, Andrew, because I was just thinking as you were saying that this wouldn't happen in China, would it? If boatloads of people just turned up in China, they would be robustly dealt with. I mean, all right, a few people want to go to China anyway. There's not great opportunities and future in the same kind of way, although some might say that is changing. But the Chinese government would find a way to deal with it. I know it's a big place, and you know they can make things happen for different reasons, which is not always pretty. But it wouldn't happen. This would not be happening, and it wouldn't happen because the government would have a robust response. But we haven't got one.
Yeah, and that's what Clinton said. Time and time again, it haunts governments. Government breaks down when the people that are paying the tax see no return. And you're highlighting of Manchester. What's the point of getting out of bed in Manchester? I mean, now the actual scenario has broken down. So we were locked down.
Yep.
It's time to take them all with and we're talking about, mass movement of army and troops. They've got to be zip-tied, shaved, and we just got
Why do we have to do the shaved thing? What's the deal there?
It was a big play, and they went into the prisons. They took them in there, and they shaved them. I don't know why they did it. But
I'm only asking that because the difficulty with this whole debate, as you know, and this is what Labour are now finding out, they were quite happy to write the Tories off as a bunch of racists almost, until they discovered they're in charge of it and realised there's naff all they could do either. So I know some people won't care about this, but the best way is to find a way where you don't give an inch to that rabid left-wing group that will shout you down for being, shame on you. If you can... Now, some people go, so what if they say that? But that is usually the trick, isn't it? Trying to do it in a way that... And where would you put all of those people as well?
Well, you just have to cut America a deal and say, look, you've got... how many states is it? 52? Well, we've got... around 50. About 40, 50. Will you come and get them from RAF Northolt and Lakenheath, and we'll pay you to put them in your jails. And then the reason that you shave their heads, I'm not advocating it, but the reason you do it is to show control. This is what we're going to do to you. So anybody that's here just goes, right, I'm out. Get me a lorry going the other way, because nobody wants that to happen to them. Yeah. And you're right. In a civilized society, you wouldn't even countenance this. But we've gone past civilized society. The rules we had to deal with this have been abused.
Yep.
So now we've got to try and get it back. But the great tragedy is there will be a tragedy, and we'll chat about it, Ian, and it's so sad.
Yeah, you're absolutely bang on. That something will happen that takes it to the next level. And as you rightly say, Andrew, even the migrants themselves dying in the Channel, and some kids have died in the Channel. I know that's not common... those journeys are not commonly with children, but some have. Even that hasn't stopped. The left, as it were, and others going, no, we'll carry this on. Crazy times, Andrew. Thank you very much indeed. Maria from Essex says, I'm the daughter of an immigrant. My dad emigrated from Poland to England in the early 1950s. He was not given any help or benefits. He's made his way, worked hard, bought a house, learned to speak English. Immigrants now seem to have a sense of entitlement and expect to be given everything for free. It's so unfair. I'm now a loyal Reform member. Maria's point is brilliant. Whether it was people that came over Windrush, whether it was people leaving Eastern Europe, as Maria's dad did at that time, none of those people thought, because it would have been unthinkable to go, well, I'll just come there and they'll give me some stuff. And I don't, I'm pretty sure most people on a boat across the Channel would quite like a job when they got here at some point. You're not going to live your life on £50 or £49 a week forevermore. But the idea, the sense that you will be given all of this is clearly a pull factor. People back then in the 50s, 60s, 70s and the like, it never occurred to them that the state would just give you everything if you arrived. That was not part of the deal, but that's kind of where we've ended up now. Maria, thank you for that. 0344 499 1000. More on the way from you in just a couple of moments. 2:30, this is Talk.
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Just gone 2:30. More comment from you on the way in a couple of moments' time. Lots to get through this afternoon. There's so much news around, and we haven't even explored what's going on the west coast of the United States with riots and Trump sending in the cavalry, as it were. But we'll come to all of that throughout the course of the programme. Also this afternoon, Kemi Badenoch says employers should have the right to ban burqas and other face coverings at work. She also hit out at Sharia courts and first cousin marriage, calling them barriers to integration. The row was reignited, of course, after Reform UK chairman Zia Youssef quit over the issue, but then dramatically rejoined the party on Saturday night in apparently 2 or 3 different roles that he's having now. Let's speak with Kunwal Kuldoon Shahid, Pakistan-based correspondent, The Diplomat. Also written a piece on this issue in The Spectator as well. Kunwal, good afternoon to you, sir.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. I don't know how common you see this debate, but it comes around from time to time. It goes away for a few years, then it returns. It's like the burqa. Well, France are doing something. Denmark are doing something. Should we revisit this question? I mean, firstly, is it... I hate the phrase Islamophobic because it's too general, but let's take it on that basis. Is it Islamophobic or offensive or even racist if a government or a company wants to say, I'm sorry, I don't care what religion you are, but you can't cover your face?
I mean, I too am not a fan of the term Islamophobia, and I'll be more specific because it centers the ideology of Islam more so than the people. Specifically, the argument that talking about banning the burqa is quote unquote Islamophobic makes little sense, since there are over 10 Muslim majority countries that have bans in place for the burqa and the niqab and the hijab, and it's important to differentiate between these garbs as well. And these countries range from Kyrgyzstan, Bosnia, Algeria, Tunisia. Yeah. This is like Central Asia, Eastern Europe, North Africa, Middle East, Central Africa. So it's a wide array of Muslim majority countries with various histories, various various sects and various political thought in those countries and various kinds of governments in those countries. So they have come to the conclusion that these garbs are not only a security threat, some of them even have gone as far as to say they're not part of their culture. So if those Muslim majority countries can say those things, countries in Asia and in Europe where Islam has been the majority religion for centuries, if they can have that discussion and have those policies, why can't you have that in Western Europe?
Well, indeed.
It's an easy question.
I did an interview years ago with an imam in, I can't even remember where he was, but he was staggered. He couldn't believe. He said, you guys are implementing laws that we did away with like decades ago. We don't even recognise that. There's no group or no women who are... It wasn't just about the hijabs and burqas, it was about more than that. It was about all sorts of items of clothery and, the showing of skin, etc. It was across the board. And this guy couldn't believe it. He said, why are you having arguments in the UK that we don't even have over here?
And I think what's a bit misleading is that whether you talk about the UK, the laws in France or Denmark or Belgium and Switzerland, there are no burqa bans in these countries. They have bans on face coverings. So it's not targeting a specific piece of clothing. It's about anything that covers your face, anything that hides your identity. There's a ban on those. So the question is not to ban the burqa or not ban the burqa. The question is, are you going to allow the exception for the burqa or the niqab? That is the question. So it's the phrasing that makes it sound like you're targeting this particular garment. For instance, you're talking about banning these garments in offices. I'm pretty sure most of these offices wouldn't allow you to have your full face covered. They won't allow you to wear the balaclava or the Spider-Man mask at work. So do you want them to have this exception for this on the grounds of cultural or religious reasons? That is the question. And the irony over here is that even if you look at it from the religious point of view, from the Islamic point of view, the Quranic idea of satar, the concept of satar that is mandated for women, does not actually include the face. So even a literal conservative orthodox interpretation of Islam does not mandate this. So it's just a case of you allowing the Islamists or certain section of Muslims to have complete control over the narrative of all of the Muslims in Britain, which is unfortunate.
That's a good point. Do you think there has been, as we've seen, lots of, sadly, lots of divisions between different sections of society? I know there was some evidence a few years ago that young Muslim girls were taking to the burqa almost as a kind of, not so much a defiance or a rebellion, but at a time when they felt their faith was constantly being reduced and diminished and insulted. It was a way of taking ownership of their identity. Are you familiar with that argument, Kunwa?
Absolutely familiar with that argument. I've written articles discussing that argument. I think it's almost as if we have two different debates going on in the world today. One that talks about Muslims and minorities, and the one talks about Muslims as majorities. So when the Muslims are majorities, all of these garments become very evident tools of oppression, like in Iran or Iraq, these countries. It's not a case of choice over there. Women are being subjugated into wearing these garments. Where, on the other hand, you talk about Muslim minorities, and I think it's a bit misleading, where Muslim minorities feel as though their religion is being targeted. For example, there's constant discussion about France or French laïcité. There is no law in France that specifically targets Islamic clothing or Islam. They have laws in place that ban all religious symbols at public institutions.
Is that a helpful thing, do you think? Because I mean, certainly, if we are trying to get social cohesion going, the idea that, and you could apply it, I was in a church quite recently. I was looking at the vicar, and I thought, I don't want to in any way disrespect Christianity, but I did look at what he was wearing, and I thought, that's some funky stuff he's got going on there, considering it's 2025. But of course, that's part of it. I wasn't mocking him or his right to wear whatever he wants, but is there a sense that some of the stuff, it's not very Western, and this would be the cultural argument rather than anything else, to have people of whatever faith walking around in stuff that was designed 1,000, 2,000 years ago? And I think we lost Kunwa's line on that point. No big panic. If we get him back shortly, we will. Failing that, I think there was enough in that for you to comment on your thoughts. I think that's my takeaway on it. That I suppose you'd have to, as he said, the burqa thing in France is not really it's not about Islam, it's about any kind of face covering. But actually, broader than that, let's be honest, there is an argument that says, I don't want to live in a world where people walk around as if it's 1586 in Yemen. I want to live in a 21st century, and I find it divisive. It's very heavily symbolic of a faith, and that's not what we're about. But would you apply that then to nuns? Would you apply it to other faiths? I think we've got Kunwa back with us, if the line will hold for a bit. Kunwa, I was just really there making the point, the cultural point, as to whether we risk cultural assimilation if we allow people of whatever faith and obviously Muslims are more prominent in this respect than others, but there are nuns and there are all sorts of other areas we could look at. Is it a recipe for disaster if we're looking for cultural cohesion?
I think it's unfortunate that it's easy to dismiss these discussions, including our conversation, as men telling women what to wear, that's not true at all. You're talking about whether or not there should be exceptions for Islam. For instance, if there are places that allow all religious symbols, women should have absolute freedom to wear the hijab. Hijab is the Islamic head covering. The face is, they're not concealing their face. It should be nobody's business that they're wearing the hijab or not. But if they're covering their faces, wearing the niqab, which is a partial covering, or the burqa, which is a full covering, that becomes a security question. Because if you ask people, if you have a survey whether Face ID is critical for security, most of them would say yes. Well, at the same time, would you ask them, okay, you should ban face coverings, including the burqa? And the answer would automatically change. It's fundamentally the same question.
Yeah. Indeed. Kunwar, thank you for your time. Really interesting stuff. He's written a piece in The Spectator on this. That's Kunwar Khuldoon Shahid, Pakistan-based correspondent. He writes for The Diplomat, but also, as I mentioned, that piece in The Spectator as well. I'll tell you the best example. This is quite uncomfortable for many people, but let's just call it what it is. If you go to a town that is mostly Muslim and you take a snapshot of a high street where lots of people are wearing religious garb, and I would include the burqa, the hijab, whatever, in that men are also wearing items of clothing that you wouldn't call particularly Western, and you take a snapshot of that high street, it doesn't look like this country. That's really what people mean, isn't it? That's what they're saying. Wow, look at that. This is meant to be the UK. That doesn't look like the UK. And Islam, as distinct perhaps from other religions, has very much a cultural component to it. Living your life very much via the conduit of your faith and the conduit of the instructions of your book, the Quran in this case. So it's all of that. It's a bit more than just a woman mooching around in a burqa. It's that. And I think I'm probably calling it for what it is here. Now, of course, we know there is a group out there, that's a bit Islamophobic, isn't it? You know, what are you saying? Everyone should be white. Well, no, we're saying that there is such a thing as a sort of a rough national identity. Whether you're black, brown or white doesn't really matter. It's never mattered. I've never lived in a country that was only white. I wouldn't know what that looked like. It might even be a bit weird, frankly, if it was only white. That's not the issue. The issue is how much kind of an identity you were told, how much weight of that identity you attach to things like that. So think of the snapshot. I'm thinking, go to Bradford, go to Leicester, certain parts, obvious, but go to East London, walk down, I don't know, Mile End Road in East London, go slightly further east into Newham and areas such as that, where you'll find very much that's what the high street will look like. And the question is that a problem? I don't think it's about getting on a tube. If I jump on a tube and a woman walks... In fact, I was in... Where was it? Hawksmoor. No, I'm banned from there, not Hawksmoor. It was the other one, the other steak place. I'm not, by the way. Only about a month ago, and a woman walked in with full face covering, and she was sitting in front of me with her mates who didn't have full face covering, so I don't know what the thinking was there. She obviously supported it. Her two mates didn't. And this sounds weird. I'd never seen somebody with a full face covering eat their food. And I literally was thinking, how does this work? What happens here? I genuinely don't know. And obviously I wasn't staring at somebody as they chowed down on a nice bit of fillet. I was just intrigued. And the way she had her food was the food went under the veil. And that's how you might be going, well, yeah, of course. Now, I was just wondering whether the veil slipped down or whatever. Genuinely had never seen that before. So it's not that. If you jump on a train or a tube and one person walks on in a burqa, I don't think many people, it's, oh my God, there's a woman in a burqa. I don't think it's that. I think it's actually the bigger image of what collectively people wearing religious garb, and this happens to be Islam, that's a dominant aspect of this discussion, but you could apply it to other groups. If you see Hasidic Jews, I think a similar kind of observation is also made, but clearly not in the same sort of numbers, etc. Is that really what we're talking about here? 0344 499 1000. Cliff in Berkshire says, I wanted to go into work tomorrow. Could I wear a balaclava all day without anyone objecting? I doubt it. Well, Cliff, I don't know whether you're a looker or not, because I think that's dependent. You know, I work with a few people that probably should be wearing balaclavas, but nothing we can do about that at the moment. More from you in a couple of moments' time. And also this is fabulous, by the way, a chance to win FIFA Club World Cup final tickets. Yes, I did say World Cup final tickets, 2026, biggest football tournament on the planet. This is the final, and these are not easy to come by. If you fancy this, thanks to our friends at DAZN, we've got tickets to give away here. You want to know the detail? Have a listen.
Hi, it's Jim White here. Here at talkSPORT, we're gearing up for the Club World Cup in the United States. And to celebrate, we've got 2 tickets to the final in New York on July the 13th to give away. We'll sort flights, accommodation, and give you $5,000 spending money to spend however you like. 18 plus, UK excluding Northern Ireland. All you have to do to enter is text the word football to 83338 by the 13th of June at 11 p.m. and you're in the draw. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. You must have the bill payer's permission or send your name and number by post to Club World Cup Final Prize Draw, PO Box 3190, Colchester CO2 8GP, to arrive by 5 p.m. on June the 18th.
This is a TalkSport limited competition run on TalkSport Talk and Virgin Radio UK stations. Full terms and conditions at talksport.com.
This all comes back to a dangerous idea, and believe me, it's infected this country too, which is we don't enforce certain laws because we've decided that we just don't like them. I don't want to hear a jip, not a whiff of anything out of anybody that says, oh, I'm a rule of law, defend the rule of law. If you defend the rule of law, you defend the right of these officers to go into work, to do their job in difficult circumstances, to enforce the law, and the laws of the land say you can't break into the country illegally.
Zia had been working 24/7, 7 days a week, and you know, like all of us, sometimes you want to take too much on, and you're just pushing on. And look, he was exhausted. He regrets his tweet. What Nigel's agreed with Zia is that he will focus on Doge. It is such a big opportunity to save money, to prove we can do it in these councils. I'm very focused on the pension side of it, where again there's huge sums to be saved. What we've
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
10 to 3. Back with you in just a second. Don't go away, Glenn. Don't go away, Richard. We've got the voice of doom before we go any further. It's a brand new voice. This is the mystery voice with a political angle. You're invariably looking for a politician, an MP, past or present, or somebody who is obviously connected to the world of politics. Here's the new voice.
There's quite a lot of dismissal.
Oh, that's good. This is fresh. That's the first time I've heard it, by the way. Amy put it together. It's so cryptic, even she doesn't know who it is. Have another listen.
There's quite a lot of dismissal.
Who is that? 87222. Don't phone in because we haven't got any prizes, but if you want to have a crack at it and join in, that is the number, 87222. If we get a right answer, we will tell you after the news who it is. If not, it rolls over. Here it is again.
There's quite a lot of dismissal.
87222 if you want to have a crack at that. Back on the phones. Glenn in Milton Keynes. How are you doing, Glenn?
Hello, mate. How you doing?
Yeah, good, thanks. Yeah, what are your thoughts?
No one's ever answered me this question. What would happen if it was the other way around? If thousands of people from this country, young, fit men, went over to France, what do you think the French would do?
Shoot us.
Okay? I mean, honestly, I've heard all this about, we can't upset the French. I was listening to, one of the other stations, there was a solicitor or barrister, but he seemed to know his onions. He said, we've got every right to turn them back. He said, we're sovereign countries, nothing that they could do. He said, the only reason we don't do it is the top civil servants who run the country, as you know, Ian, not the MPs we vote. He said they wouldn't let us do it.
So you could literally, every time a load of boats arrived in Dover, because these people don't leg it, do they? They're not. It's not they run away. They're there, OK? And so you could then say, OK, guys, you come in with us, you go back onto another vessel, and that vessel takes you back to France, yeah?
Well, that's what he said. He said they can't do nothing about it because, you know, we're a sovereign country. They're invading our country. But he said the civil servants won't allow it because they don't... Like Brexit, you know, when they were all crying because everybody voted against... He said the top civil servants won't have it. I mean, I can't understand. You talk about millions, billions of pounds it's going to be for the hotel.
The numbers are just off the scale.
But we spent billions of pounds, and a lot of people, as you know, made a lot of money out of the COVID deal. All this Nightingale places, you know, hundreds of things were put up in weeks.
Yeah.
All these beds. You tell me we couldn't do that and say, sorry, not hotels, but you lot stay in here.
I said during COVID, Glenn, never again can a government use the phrase, this is not possible, because we now know anything is possible. If you can lock down an economy, imprison people in their homes, and simultaneously build 16 hospitals in about half an hour, anything is possible.
A lot of people are earning lots of money out of it.
An awful lot of money. Did anyone ever stay in those hospitals, by the way?
Oh, dear. But listen, what would you think the French... I mean, the French wouldn't have it if it was the other way around. The French people riot. And we're just sort of taking it on the chin.
Well, they have already got a problem, though, in fairness. I mean, they've got, you know, not all of these migrants come to this country. Some stay there. And, of course, if you go to Paris, we did a little kind of mini documentary thing a few years ago, went to Paris, and the amount of people living under railway arches was off the scale. And they were saying, you know, the French government are doing nothing for us at all. But they were just stuck there. I don't know. I can't remember the full story of the backstory. These weren't... this wasn't necessarily part of the same story, but it was ridiculous. I mean, it was hopeless almost. So France also have a problem.
Look at all the London parks, beautiful parks. You can't go down here now.
Yeah.
All the tents and all that, you know, urinating against our statues of all heroes and all that. And so Khan, I mean, how did he get anointed? I don't know. You know, he's sort of saying, you know, we can't do a lot about it.
We can't do a lot about it. Don't you love that phrase? But we are able to build a hospital in 15 minutes if we need to. Yeah, you're right, Glenn. I think what you do in that call is highlight the sheer kind of bang your head against a brick wall nature of this debate. Could you take people back to France? You'd have to... Your boat would have to be able to dock for a start to do it, I guess. There'd be that. Could we withstand a diplomatic incident with the French? Yeah, I think we could give that a go, couldn't we? Richard's in Sheffield. Richard, what do you think?
Hi, mate. Just ringing up to tell you, like, how it is in Sheffield at the moment.
Yeah.
There's parts, like in Sheffield, where you can, like, just go there. If you just woke up and not know, like, exactly where you were, you'd think you were in Islamabad, you know, or Lahore or something, because the Muslims, they just don't respect the English language. They just talk in Urdu or I think it's Urdu. But you know, it's just not the Sheffield I grew up in. And I know I could see this coming 20 years ago. Do you know what I mean? And like I've got a lot of black friends, and they like that were born here and that Jamaican mates and that
have the same view.
They're saying exactly the same as me. Do you know what I mean?
Is it? I mean, it's a tricky one, isn't it? Because if you consider what we're talking about, mostly, OK, I'm talking about people who emigrate here from another country. They start a business, whether it's a shop, whatever. Now, in itself, there's nothing wrong with that because people do it all over the world. Brits legged it to Spain, blah, blah, blah. I get that. But there's a sense that this is something else, right? This is something more going on. And it kind of compromises what are you saying, our culture?
Yeah, totally. You know, like, these, like, I used to love going fishing and stuff, and that's, to me, that's an English thing, like, me and my mates used to go fishing, stuff like that, but, like, Pottet River Don we used to fish, it goes through that area, and, well, there's a lot of areas like that now. Like Mike was saying earlier, in Sheffield, there were 2 Eritrean tribes, whatever, like going at each other,
battling it out. Yeah, I mean, there's no, that shouldn't be the case, right?
In England,
I know. Have a row, but do it in Eritrea. I mean, that's surely the answer, isn't it? I mean, I don't want to sound too harsh about it, but these are exact. And there's so many of these kind of stories. And again, the left will always shoot them down and say, well, that's either racist or it's Islamophobic or it's something like that. I don't know what point it became a moment to have to apologise for wanting to have a certain level of a cohesive culture. Now, that doesn't mean you don't have people of all... Again, I said a second ago, you and I, Richard, we have probably never known this country to be only white or only Christian, etc. There's always been some level of immigration. What the sense is now, I suppose, is that it's out of control.
Out of control, completely. Like you sort of like adhered to earlier, like kind of sort of like a bit like it's gone a bit too far now. Do you know?
If you take a snapshot of high streets, that kind of thing.
Well, because yeah, definitely, yeah. No,
and again, even when I said that, I thought I'm going to get attacked from the left on this. My position isn't about anti-anything. It's about what makes the best society. And that best society would doubtless be made up of lots of different people and backgrounds. It's when you ghettoise an area, when you have division, when you have all of that happening, and then we can get into things like translations in hospitals and blah, blah, blah. You can get into that territory. You think, no, that's not what multiculturalism is meant to be. That's multiculturalism, if that's the word. I know it's a tricky word, but that's multiculturalism not working, right? That's not working. Listen, Richard, we stopped there for time, but thank you very much indeed. Brad in Cambridge, I think you summed it up perfectly. It's much easier when someone says it exactly as it is without dancing around the edges to avoid criticism. Oh, Brad, I'm getting the criticism already, certainly on my social media, from people who, just based on those key phrases that you use, somebody will go, well, we know what... Yeah, anyone who's listened to me for years knows exactly where I come from, and it ain't that place, for God's sake. And I can still go to the Hawksmoor. Voice of Doom is on the way. This is the voice we're requiring you to identify.
There's quite a lot of dismissal.
Who's that then? 87222, if you think you know. Hopefully we have a right answer. We'll tell you after the news at 3.
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
And good afternoon, welcome back. It is the home of Common Sense, coming up on 3 minutes after 3 o'clock. So, we are discussing Britain spending a staggering £4.7 billion a year to house and care for migrants, a cost equal to the income tax paid by nearly 600,000 workers. I keep saying it, roughly the population of Manchester. That is what is financing this. And that £4.7 million doesn't really touch the site, doesn't include legal costs, it doesn't include medical costs, no NHS element in there either. So the numbers are eye-watering. How bad does it have to get before a government acts? Also this afternoon, Chancellor Rachel Reeves has been warned the police service is broken due to low pay, long hours and poor morale. She's planning real-term budget increases over the next 3 years to tackle crime. Will it be enough? Will it even touch the sides? We'll look at that in a few moments. And children could soon face smartphone curfews and app time limits under new government plans after one Year 6 class reportedly sent 9,000 WhatsApp messages in a single night. I've oddly got a story connected exactly to this that only came around just yesterday in our neck of the woods. Details on the way. Lots to go. Before we carry on and talk policing, by the way, we have the voice of doom. Remember, this is the political mystery voice. This is the voice we played you.
There's quite a lot of dismissal.
Who is that? These were some of the answers. Theresa May, no. Joanne Cherry, it is not. Mo Molan, Penny Mordaunt, Liz Truss, no. Baroness Shirley Williams, there's a Williams-esque vibe about that voice. Not her. Margaret Beckett, yeah, I get that, no. Tessa Jowell, no. Nancy Astor, slightly too old, no. Gillian Shepherd, no. But actually, we have got a right answer. In fact, it was the first guest that came through completely. Nicola in Norfolk, former Cabinet Minister Therese Coffey is the right answer. Therese Coffey. Remember her? She did work and pensions for a little bit, didn't she? And liked a cigar. And she was she Culture Minister as well, I think. Health Minister, possibly Health. I think when she got the health brief, people were kind of looking askance, under Liz Truss maybe. So there was always a picture of her with a drink and a cigar in her hand. A little bit of mischief there, but hey. Therese Coffey was the right answer, which means we have a brand new voice tomorrow at around about 2:45. So let's move to this story. The police service broken, losing officers due to low pay. I mentioned the long hours and the poor morale. Rachel Reeves has been given several warnings on this. It comes as she prepares to increase police budgets in real terms over the next 3 years. This is part of her spending review. We'll get the details on Wednesday. This is a boost that she hopes will help tackle crime. Police chiefs say Labour's pledges to halve violence against women and girls, tackle knife crime, rebuild neighbourhood policing is at risk without proper funding. Let's speak with Nick Smart, President of the Police Superintendents Association. Afternoon to you, Nick.
Afternoon, Ian. How are you doing?
Yeah, very good. Nice to have you with us. I guess this is one of those areas the police has been so starved of resources over decades now that even if you do throw a few quid in, which is more than the last lot might have done in their last few years, there is a danger it still won't touch the sides.
Absolutely. I mean, we're looking at roughly a £1.2 billion funding gap just to stand still. So there's investment required on that. We're conscious that the government has made some pledges around violence against women and girls and knife crime, but that's not all that we just do. Obviously, we've got other specialities that we're expected to deal with. We've got ageing IT, we've got ageing infrastructure, we've got a young and experienced workforce. We're losing experienced individuals, hand over fist, 9,000 last year. So at the moment we're in a crisis, and it's not very often that ourselves, the Federation and the chiefs, all come together to say the same message. But we got accused 10 years ago of crying wolf. Everything that we said 10 years ago has come to pass, and
there was a wolf, as it turned out, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We're still fighting it, and to keep the public safe. So we are in crisis point, and our plea to the Chancellor is do not forget policing. Where is policing in the priority list at this moment? And we're not quite sure where we sit.
And it's interesting, isn't it? Because the kind of nature or the role of policing has changed significantly because of the digital world we're in. I'm not talking about non-crime hate incidents and stuff on Facebook. I mean, that's maybe a separate conversation. And I'm sure money is wasted in some of those areas. However, I'm talking about digital fraud, crime that happens online, where a senior officer said to me quite recently, you almost need a whole other police force to deal with that.
Absolutely. I mean, the job has, I've got nearly 30 years and the job has changed immeasurably since I joined.
Yeah.
The influx of officers now that do, for example, counter-terrorism that, wasn't as to the forefront of policing back in the day. Online is a big issue. Vulnerability, missing people, mental health issues. This is all extra demand on top of what we traditionally have been expected to do. And if we weren't expected to do that, that's fine. But you've got to invest in the police service. If you don't invest in the service, you're not going to get any different outcomes. And we're going to struggle to meet the government's pledges, and we're going to struggle, if we're honest, to keep the public safe.
Yeah, and you mentioned things like computers. I was in a police station not that long ago just to meet a friend of mine, went in for a coffee, chatting to some of the guys there. I kid you not, Nick, and I don't think you'll be surprised, that there was computers on the desk that my college got rid of in the 1980s because they were a bit old back then, and these were still being used. It's extraordinary. I thought, what speed do these things go at? And every eye kind of rolled in the office going, mate, you've got no idea how bad this stuff is. And that's how people are trying to fight crime.
Yeah, I mean, we need massive reinvestment in our technology to deal with the modern world. And it's not just IT, it's the skills that go with it. We've got a very young workforce. They are very keen, but they are inexperienced. It's not just about attracting people, it's about retaining them. I know that we get lambasted on occasion for the quality of investigations that we do, but we're losing a load of officers, 9,000 last year, who have those investigation skills. So we've got to incentivise those individuals to stay in the organisation, and that will cost money, but you can't teach experience and you can't buy it. And one of the issues for the workforce is retaining that experience to help the younger officers at all ranks deliver and deal with the workload and make us more efficient and effective and deliver the service that the public expects of us. But at the moment, in the current situation, we are struggling.
It's difficult to know what's going to be announced this week, but of course one thing, Nick, that politicians do remarkably well, not in a good way, is that they like to make financial announcements that actually have already been announced in other ways, and then sort of throw it all into the same mix. You go, hang on a second, no, 200 million of that was already penciled in. That's not new money. So you have to kind of crunch the numbers on these things, and I don't want to, second guess what the Chancellor might do on Wednesday, but you really have to look at it the next day in the cold light of day and go, well, how much is really in the pot here?
Absolutely. I mean, the Chancellor is in an invidious position. Everybody's making laudable cases to have their particular department funded. We would say that, we'll look at the finances in the cold light of day on Thursday morning. Perhaps you might ask me the question then and see where we are, Ian. But,
well, we heard today, didn't we, that your supreme chief, if you like, the Home Secretary, was yet to get any kind of reassurances. We're only 48 hours away from this thing.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a difficult operating environment for everybody. Everybody wants more doctors, more nurses, more medicine, more schools, better defence. But we would argue that the first duty of government is to keep its citizens safe. And that is investing in a modern, fit-for-purpose police service with the right skills, the right recruits throughout all ranks, all lengths of service to deliver the pledges that the government have given. But also, when the public pick up the phone, they expect us to be there. And at the moment, we're struggling to do that, not because we don't want to, but we're dealing with other agencies' demand, which is another topic for another day, I guess, Ian. But we all know that, the tens of thousands of hours were spent picking up the slack from other partners who are struggling as well. But we are the only service that can't say no and doesn't say no. And come 5 o'clock on every day until 8 a.m. the following morning, we are society's sticking plaster. And that's got to change.
100%. Listen, Nick, great to have you on. We will speak again. Thank you, Nick Smart, President of the Police Superintendents Association. That's the words of a senior police officer, and it doesn't sound good, does it? This is one of those headlines that doesn't initially grab you. You don't really think of the implications of it. You just go, oh, it's the police, and they'll always, as he said at the end there, you know, you can't say no. The police have had a bit of a torrid time over the last few years, not always covered themselves in glory. There's been issues around, you know, corruption within. You know, I'm thinking Charing Cross, I'm thinking Sarah Everard, and all of those horrendous cases. We know that, and I will always say it. These are, you know, they're not just a few bad apples. They're almost so minute you could hardly see them in terms of numbers. But it's significant, and it's a massive PR kick in the whatsits when this happens to the police, who should always be held to a higher count. And, of course, we've had some of the social media nonsense. I've still never met a copper that agrees with any of that stuff. I was doing a function in Cleveland recently, the Bravery Awards for the police there, and I kind of made a bit of a sly gag about non-crime hate incidents, and everyone in the room just kind of laughed along with it, because agreeing that, yeah, it's ridiculous. So I don't know who the coppers are that are instructed to go out there and knock a door down or bang on a door with 6 colleagues because some parents had written some hurty words on a WhatsApp group, but those stories are among us. But they're not really the area that is costing the huge amount of money. So when the police haven't got enough money to fight crime, genuinely have not got enough money to fight crime, and retention in the police, there's a disproportionate amount of new blood in the police service, which is okay, it's great that people are joining. It just means you have, just by definition, it's not an insult, a lack of experience at that end, and people leaving sooner at the other end. I don't know where we will be in years to come, but every story we've done over the last 5 years here on this show, or whatever it is, will look like a bad warm-up act. I'm talking about police not turning up for things. That will just become the norm. You can only imagine it, because you've got to have bigger numbers, you've got to have better resources, you've got to have a IT system that is fit for the 21st. I'm not kidding you. When I saw the computer system in one police station, it looked like the kind of thing we discarded at school in 1983. I'm genuinely not making that up. 0344 499 1000. Ricky is down in London. Back on the issue of migration. Ricky, what have you got for us?
Do you remember, you're probably old enough to remember, the UN safe havens? Did you ever remember them? I was trying to find my remote because I wanted to turn the telly down.
OK.
And I can't.
They don't ring a bell initially, but tell us more.
Oh, yeah. Oh, you joke. But they used to have, what used to happen was, before like mass migration, generally it was mostly Middle Eastern countries. The UN had their own. But basically, all the countries as part of the UN, they used to supply troops, and they kind of wore blue helmets, and they would partition off part of if there was a war in Syria or something. Okay. They would partition part of it off, and all the people that fled the war would go into like a safe haven. They used to call it like a UN safe haven. So I haven't heard that mentioned for many years. And I'm talking about, bloody hell, more than 20 years ago, probably.
Yeah.
So I just.
So are you saying that we need something like that to utilise something like that, what, here or somewhere in France or what?
Well, it would happen. It used to happen, obviously, because they didn't used to come. I think what's obviously happened with the advent of technology, and even the migrants got iPhones. They're all seeing a better life in the West, so they're all flooding over here. And obviously, the people that are making money out of it, it's obviously evolved. But as I say, many decades ago, the UN used to supply troops. And they did used to like partition off part of a country or whatever. Usually, normally Arab.
So where would you suggest in this context, Ricky, that they were used?
That they will use them.
Where should we use them now, if that's what the point you were making?
Well, obviously, if there were, obviously it would be in these. Obviously, I mean Syria for one.
Okay. So in those countries where people are leaving.
Yeah, where they're fleeing from. So, but I don't see UN playing. All they seem to do is making laws. I mean, the idea of the UN initially, many years, the concept of it is to basically have like a global group of people, like everyone. Basically, was what it wanted to do was kind of amalgamate all the African, basically mix up the entire world population, and as opposed to the West and the East, and obviously the West has always been richer than African nations historically, but that was the idea of the UN anyway. But what they used to do anyway, so what they could do, it's just out there, isn't it? But the UN used to play more of an active role.
I do seem to remember, and whether it's the same thing I'm remembering, but certainly as a kid, you know, when the news came on, the United Nations sort of peacekeeping forces or whatever seemed to be those guys.
Yeah, and they wore blue helmets. I'm sure a lot of your listeners...
Yeah, maybe. I don't... Who were they? I mean, were they just recruited from other military collectively? I don't know. But, yeah, I do seem to remember hearing, you know, Carol Barnes or somebody on the news saying, you know, the United Nations peacekeeping force have gone out to, you know...
Yeah, it's countries that are part of the UN, basically.
Yeah, I would imagine so.
They supplied the troops, and it was basically a peacekeeping force. I mean, they're talking about it now, but obviously it's not done under the auspices of the UN.
Sure.
I mean, countries are supplying or want to supply.
Mate, listen, as soon as the fact that you've raised this, Ricky, somebody will immediately be in touch with us, either on message or on the phone to explain whether actually, they are still around and doing stuff. We just don't see them on the telly very much. Maybe it's that, bit like Crossroads. Ricky, thank you very much indeed. Gary says, this is reference to trying to do a deal with the French or taking boats back to France. As much as I despise the French, as I have said to you before, we cannot afford to have a row with them because they could just shut down or implement a go slow at all French ports through which much of our trade with Europe flows, causing considerable harm to our economy. Far better just to deal with the problem ourselves by removing the pull factor that draws these people here. At the end of the day, why would a migrant pay £3,000 to a people trafficker to get them across the channel if, when they get here, they were just going to lock them up in internment camps and tell them you either stay there or go home? They would just stop coming. It really is odd. And even... Thank you for that, Gary. Even the French themselves have made that point. I don't know whether Macron said it out loud or a statement from their foreign ministry or their home affairs ministry, whatever it was. But yeah, until the UK get rid of the pull factor, I mean, you'd have spent £3,000 to come to the UK. You're going to do that because you think there's something there that's certainly worth, firstly, more than £3,000, but worth much more than that going forward. Yeah, I mean, why else would you do that? You just stay in France, or you'd be in Spain, or whichever country you transitioned from before you got to France. This one in from Jill in East Devon, who says, you made a comment about Nightingale hospitals. Well, in Exeter, they are still using theirs. Can't believe other places don't do the same. I didn't know that. I mean, they were kind of... They differed a little bit, didn't they? Some were kind of erected, as I remember. Almost kind of VIP marquee style. Have I got that right? There was one sort of down, was it Canary Wharf Way, down that neck of the woods in London? I think there was one there. There was about, 16 of them or something, as memory serves. Apparently Exeter's still up and running. What about it? Thank you to Jill for that. Back to you in a couple of moments. 0344 499 1000, 3:20. This is Talk.
Talk about tone deaf and a lack of self-awareness. To say that she's been kidnapped while she's trying to deliver supplies into Hamas-held territory, where Hamas is holding 55 hostages, is just a complete lack of self-awareness and shows how disconnected these activists are from reality. It was a pathetic publicity stunt. They tried to make Israel look bad, and instead Israel has distributed an image of Greta looking longingly at an Israeli soldier, giving her a pastrami sandwich in a plastic wrapper. I think it's a fitting ending.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is from Brad in Cambridge. It says, this is reference to the police and the budgets that the police are dealing with, and the spending review happens later this week, and there is a suggestion that it won't be enough money just to run the very basics of what is needed. Brad says, I used to support the police entirely. I continue to support them, even when the occasional bad copper would turn up. However, I now have nothing but contempt for the service, and this is entirely due to their one-sided, politically motivated application of the law, says Brad. And there is that feeling out there, isn't there? And some of that will be, maybe a little bit misplaced, but there's also examples that you look at and go, well, how did that happen? How did that anti-Israel protest, the one with the swastikas and the river to the sea thing, that happen every week? How did that happen? This from Victoria in Suffolk. No mention of Australia pinching 5,000 of our police officers. My niece and policeman partner left the UK last year for Perth. Paid move, firearms training there. They get to decide whether to stay or return in a few years. Staying seems likely. Yeah. How many if you're in a nice part of the place and you got it all worked out? 5,000? I've never heard that stat before. 5,000 coppers of... Is there even 5,000 coppers in the entirety of Australia? It's a fair question. Given, what's the population of Australia, Adam? What's it now? I'm going to say 10 million. I'm going to say 10 million. Adam reckons it's 20 million. I'm going to revise it to 12, all right? Adam? What, nearly 27 million? Wow, I can remember when Australia had the same population as London. And that was a few years ago, obviously. Things are growing down under, it seems. Let's go to Alan. Sorry. Let's go to... I'm suddenly a teenager again. Let's go to Alan in Aberdeen. Alan, how are you doing?
Not bad. How are you?
Very good, thanks. What are you thinking?
Good. It's on Greta and her little...
Isn't she good?
Oh, isn't she just? Greta Begum. Hamas has got...
It's like Gandhi has returned, right?
Isn't it just? Personally, I think that Greta and her lovies should not only be shown the footage of the 7th of October, they should be introduced to survivors and victims of October the 7th, and they should be taken to Kibbutz Nir Oz, Kibbutz Be'eri. They should be taken to the Nova Music Festival, and then maybe take them into Tel Aviv, into the likes of the area of Jaffa, where there's Muslims, Jews all living and working side by side.
Yep.
Give them a touch of reality in the real world. Instead, they're actually supporting what they're supposed to be standing against, Ian.
Yeah. And of course, what these people don't... in fact, it's laughable in a way, isn't it? If you are kind of Greta or her ilk, Alan, as I'm sure you know, you have to have an enemy, don't you? You've got to have there's always got to be an enemy. And because if you haven't got an enemy, you've got nothing to argue about. You can't showcase your superiority if there's no enemy to point out the inferiority. So you have to keep doing that. And when they find one, and when they slay the enemy, they just find another one, right?
Well, this is it. But what they should be, I'm not being funny. These are the people that were screaming Me Too. They're the people that are supposed to be standing up against tyranny, against rape, against child molestation, against murder of women and children and men. But they are actually supporting the very people, the very thing that they are supposed to be standing against.
Yep.
Do you know something? There's even Yazidi sex slaves. One was rescued last October, as well as the 58 Israeli hostages.
Yep.
You've got Yazidi slaves in there. Where are these people? In protest.
They're never there. They're never there.
Crimes.
There was 1 million Muslims kicked out of Pakistan over the course of the last few years. The most horrendous abuse of these people. Nothing was ever said about it. Not even a word. You never saw anybody down the Chinese embassy mounting a protest.
No, I don't know what sort of world are we living in, Ian, where you're supporting the perpetrators and not the victims. We used to, in the 60s and 70s.
Yeah.
They used to be protesting for the rights of people, but now they're marching and protesting in support of some of the most vile, heinous crimes that have been committed since the Holocaust.
Yeah, but they're relaxed about that because they see that the bad guy is Israel and therefore the West, not just Israel, so us, particularly America, and between us all, this kind of trilogy of countries. And their stories is, form the big arch enemy. And so they're satisfied that they are the David and we're the Goliath, and they're essentially punching up. So they can do anything. You can call anyone anything you like if you've convinced yourself that the person that you're insulting is more powerful than you. Therefore, it gives you a free rein to be whatever you want, including a half-wit.
But I feel that they're actually insulting the very, very victims of genocide, of rape, of murder. I mean, Greta's saying she's been kidnapped. No, her and her little anti-Semitic lovies have been escorted, and then they will be freely put on a plane. They're not going to be held in hostages. They're not going to be put into markets and sold like pieces of meat, like the jihadists that they're supporting do.
Yeah.
So
You're bang on. You're bang on, Alan. I stopped there for time, but thank you very much indeed. Dan says, geez, Ian, 10 million population. Get with the programme. Geography isn't your big skill, is it? Says Dan. This was reference my estimate that the population of Australia was 10 or at best 12 million. I just seem to remember when I was at school, don't ask me why this happened because we didn't have an Australian teacher, but for some reason, and I've still got the school book at home somewhere in the loft as you end up keeping these things, we did a whole focus on Australia. This was in primary school. And I remember the 3 drawings to this day that I'm most pleased about when I was at school. And I knew at the time, when even as a kid, you go, no, that I've done all right there. I've done all right. I've done this pretty well. One was drawing the map of Australia with all the various cities on it. The second was drawing a duck-billed platypus. And the third was drawing a frilled lizard. If you don't know what one of those things is, it's the lizard that, you get kind of outback way with like a big thing round its neck. And they sometimes get stuck in the fences because they go through the fence and then in panic they put their hood thing up. Then they can't get, like an umbrella, you can't get back out the fence. And then a dingo comes along. I'm not making this up. A dingo comes. I'm right, Adam, right? A dingo comes along and eats the lizard. There you go. Yeah, like Adam's ever seen one of these things. I, however, have literally handled a frilled lizard because when and by the way, my knowledge of Australia might not be great in terms of the population, Dan, but I've kind of been there a couple of times and spent some time there too. I went to Melbourne Zoo on a tour with the head zookeeper, and I held a frilled lizard, and it wasn't lost on me. I thought, wow, this is the thing I drew as a kid, and here I am 30 years later or whatever it was, actually holding one of these. They're quite vicious little beasts as well. So yes, Australia is wonderful, but clearly it's more populated than I thought it was. But I've always thought that if you look at rush hour in Melbourne, it's a different rush hour to, say, London. It's like still full, but it doesn't look as full. So literally the lack of population density is apparent at certain times. That's certainly what I took from it. Nonetheless, and we'll have more frilled lizard lessons tomorrow, and I think we should make this a regular feature. In fact, Adam, our producer, could come on. Australian animal of the day. There you go. Yeah, forget Voice of Doom. Aussie animal of the day. We'll ban kangaroos, because everyone will say a kangaroo, won't they? So they're banned, and they're idiots as well, kangaroos, so forget them. But we might start with the frilled lizard. We'll have full details tomorrow on the programme. Amy, who's on the desk today, can do all the frilled lizard sound effects. If you could look those up for us, Amy, that'd be brilliant. A duck-billed platypus. You've never lived until you've heard a duck-billed platypus wail. That would be the, that's the ultimate. It's the mating sound of the duck-billed platypus. It happens underwater, but, same thing applies. Don't discriminate just because they're aqua-based. So we've got all of that going on. New feature coming. Aussie animals tomorrow on the programme. 0344 499 1000. Didn't even mention an emu, did I? Wow, what about that? 0344 499 1000. Lines are open. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
25 to 4. We've just been discussing the Australian animal feature that we're bringing to the show. We didn't even mention spiders. Man alive, they've got a crock of bad uns down there. I'm telling you, anything that's got 8 legs in Australia is going to kill you. It's almost as simple as that. There's no redemption. Like over here, we've got a house spider. There's sometimes, you get a really big house spider over here, they're you think, man alive, that's huge. But it's not going to do it. They are all slightly venomous, by the way. They just don't, it's not strong enough over here. But in Australia, wow. One bite from a funnel web could down a herd of horses. That's how these things mean business. In a population of just 5 million. 0344 499 1000. Let's move on to more serious matters here. Children could soon face limits on smartphone use under new government plans to boost online safety. Curbs like 2-hour app limits and 10 p.m. curfews are being considered, but critics say sticking plasters won't fix weak laws after one Year 6 class sent 9,000 WhatsApp messages in just one night. Let's speak with Arabella Skinner, Policy Director of Health Professionals for Safer Screens. Arabella, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Ian.
Nice to have you with us. Now, by a weird coincidence, our neighbour came over yesterday. It's Sevenoaks, glass of red. What's wrong with that? But she was telling us all about what was happening. She's just taken her daughter off all social media. She said the big problem she was having, Snapchat had to go, but WhatsApp was where she felt the real damage was. And her and her partner and lots of other parents had screenshot some of the things. We stood there absolutely just gobsmacked at what was happening. I think they said like things like the F word, and oddly that wasn't even the worst offence. There was homophobia, there was racism, everything you know what I'm talking about. There was also like 1,000 in one day had gone out with a horrendous nature, bullying, and the entire year was on the WhatsApp group. Now that in itself is a problem, right? You've got hundreds of kids. You know what it's like when you've got one with 8 friends in it. That's problematic for me. But hundreds or thousands is a recipe for disaster.
Absolutely, and you've absolutely banged the nail on the head here. And, the positive thing about the government's announcement is that they've actually now recognised that addiction and the addictive nature of these devices is a problem. But when you're particularly talking about some of these areas, you're talking about WhatsApp. I think as adults, it's hard to get our heads around quite how insidious WhatsApp is for our children and to understand the kind of things they're seeing. I think we think our children, people are trying to find things, but they're actually not. It's turning up in their algorithms, it's turning up in their feeds. And the papers today had what seems fairly innocuous, children following really ridiculously complex skincare routines that would be complex and difficult on middle-aged skins. But on pre-teen skins, it's leaving them with skin allergies for the rest of their lives. Wow. And this is the kind of thing that this kind of insidiousness of continuous comparative and influencer elements across social media, that's probably the most benign element of it. But when you're talking about the kind of things your neighbour was telling you, it's the consistency of non-stop cyberbullying and being on screen and in this environment all the time. In the old days, if you were having a tough time at school, at least you could go home and it would disappear. And if you had an embarrassing moment, it's not going to be filmed and shared with everyone, and it's not going to be there for posterity. And this is what our children are having to put up with. And it's really not a surprise that we now have 500 children a day in England referred to the mental health services for anxiety. Yeah. I mean, we feel as health professionals that this is a public health emergency, and we need to start really embracing it and coming to some really tough regulatory decisions. Yeah. Also, we're calling for a public health campaign because, yes, this is a parenting issue, but we haven't told parents that this is a problem. There is nothing in Start for Life. There's nothing in the Little Red Book. There's nothing until your children sort of hit their teens when you suddenly go, and it's too late. Yeah. We need to be there much earlier in this process to talk about the risks of all screen usage, which go simply beyond the content.
There's a couple of points to that. I mean, our friend was telling us that her daughter was waking up early so she could check the messages to see if she was referenced in any of them. So, and she usually wasn't, but that felt like a daily routine that she had to go through. She's a young teenager, and checking through, am I mentioned, or is any of my friends mentioned? Each time she would go on there, she'd be morose for about 3 or 4 hours afterwards because something had been said, even if it was something small, it had got to her. As you say, bullying and horrible things used to be left at the school gates. That was bad enough. But now we have this 24/7. And the weird part about it, Arabella, is that the kids are all identifiable on the WhatsApp group. It's not like they're even hidden.
Absolutely. And this is where it's quite a complex issue, because is it school's responsibility when it's out of school? Well, no, it's a parent responsibility. But how do you manage that? And in many cases, you don't have access and people aren't seeing this because, particularly if the children are over 13, you don't have an automatic right to be looking at the data and looking at what your child is on, because they can sign up for those things. We also know that age verification is really poor in this country. I mean, we all know that it's very easy to just tick a box. And in theory, the Online Safety Act and the Children's Code will be making that much stronger in July. We'll be watching that. Because, for example, in France, Pornhub have just left France because the age verification is kicked in and the punishment is too harsh. Wow. And they've decided they're not going to play there. So we need, there's just no excuse for us not doing this properly, and no excuse for our children being exposed to this kind of stuff when there are tools in place to actually stop this and be really tough, because people are doing this knowing the outcomes on our children simply to make money. And that's just fundamentally unacceptable.
Yeah, I also find it odd, and I'm normally, I'm fairly liberal on these things, and I do believe in parental responsibility, but it's also the 21st century, and companies and organisations like Apple, I think, do now have a responsibility. They can no longer say, well, we don't make phones for kids, because part of what they do is for kids. Everybody knows it, whether they're borrowing their parents' phone or whether they get their first sort of slightly older version of a smartphone when they turn 11 or 12. And, of course, Apple themselves, when it comes to things like family sharing, also make a distinction between over 13s and under 13s in terms of the way you might set it up. So it's nonsense to say, I cannot believe I've got my phone here, you've got one, as we've all got one. Yeah. We're always mesmerised and absolutely blown away by the kind of stuff it can do. I can make a podcast on it, I can do this, I can do that, I can do my banking, communicate across the world. Is someone telling me that Apple can't have one toggle button that immediately turns that phone into something that doesn't have any of this stuff? It has Apple Music, it might have their little arcade for playing games, it would have maybe maps, because that might be helpful, and you can ring your mum and dad and text them, and that's it.
You're absolutely right, and there are manufacturers starting to look at this area, and as consumers we need to be demanding this. But can you think of any other product in the world that we as the consumers have to prove it's unsafe before they actually do something about it? That's what we're being asked to do by governments. So governments are saying, well, I'm not really going to look at this until we get more evidence it's unsafe. We don't put things out there normally until we've proven they're safe. So this is round about the houses. And we spend a huge amount of time looking at the evidence, and we believe the evidence of whole child health is overwhelming, that these things are more harmful than they are good. And we need to change this to be a world where we use tech for good and for the benefits, like you say, maps, like you say, using, finding where people are and calling, but not these kind of nasty, insidious elements. And we know these things are designed by the cleverest people to be the most addictive things that get you engaged in it. We also know if you go further down the scale to early years, and we've got way more problems coming, we have the very youngest now, 27% of 2 to 4 year olds have their own smartphone, and they are watching
2 to 4 year olds.
2 to 4 year olds. That's Children's Commissioner Ofsted Ofcom data. And it's because you've got hand-me-downs and you've got them looking at them. But this causes real physical issues, such as much more likely to have myopia, and physical issues like not really developing the core strengths and neck and all those issues, but also the inability to pay attention. We all know the impact that looking at short-form content does to us all the time, when it's beep, 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 flick, 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 and you're never concentrating. And we wonder why we have an issue with children getting into school and not being able to concentrate, not being able to focus. We talk a lot of our child and adolescent psychiatrists and our speech and language therapists who are part of our group talk a lot about the problems that they're seeing with these youngest children, and it has gone exponentially. We're now talking 2 million children in the UK with speech and language therapy issues, and that's gone up by about a quarter in the last couple of years. So this is a really significant shift, and unless we start early, by the time we get to the teens, you are having to do, you're pretty much on a hiding to nothing. And we need to be communicating this from day one to parents and not confusing them with the fact that they're always being sent home with apps to work on and do things with.
This is that horrible phrase, work in progress, but you just hope it's not hard for anyone to understand the problems here, of course, and I don't think anyone would disagree with the problems either, but you'd just like to think there was greater action from those that really are in a position to make a difference. Listen, Arabella, thank you. We will speak again, I'm sure. Arabella Skinner, Policy Director of Health Professionals for Safer Screens. When our neighbour was going through some of the messages, these are 12-year-olds. There's not a lot of stuff that would shock me. If a 12-year-old had seen, an image that was unsafe, whether it was violent or sexual, whatever it happened to be, that in itself wouldn't surprise me, because the internet exists and they've had it, the internet in all of their lives. So They know if you want to search for something a bit weird, a bit offensive, it's there. But it was the personalised chats. I'd never really considered WhatsApp to be, you don't really consider WhatsApp to be social media in that normal sense. It's not Snapchat, it's not X, it's not, Insta, any of that. But it does largely seem to function as, among this cohort, as almost the worst kind of social media. I mean, the stuff that was on there. There was the obvious stuff that you might expect, a lot of racism, homophobia, that kind of thing. But it wasn't just that. That would be bad enough. But it was the level of language and the way some people spoke to each other. And you've got, I think she said there were 300 on this group. Imagine having a WhatsApp group with 300. I mean, your phone would not stop pinging. I try to get out of groups as much as I can. Somebody adds me, I add myself, what's the word? Take myself off the thing. I find them horrendous, and then they become something, and then you get tangent groups that then pop up of some of the people that were on the other group. Like this happens with a lot of parents as well. They're just ridiculous. They're mostly ridiculous, and they're mostly a waste of your time. As a 12-year-old who's, going through puberty, experiencing the world, wondering about your confidence, where you stand, you open up your phone on a Monday morning, and there's a load of people telling you that you're fat and ugly and throwing in a few other insults as well. Now you might go, wow, that doesn't mean anything. It does if you're 12, and that's literally, you see it on the screen. Somebody in year 7, whatever, that you don't even really know them, but they're on the same WhatsApp group. How does that even exist? I think the school should get involved. I think the school should go, right, any kid that's on this WhatsApp group, you're going to be told to leave the school on Monday morning unless your parents get you off it. I mean, they are so poisonous, it's unbelievable. And when I saw this yesterday, I genuinely thought, well, my education has now been completed on this one, even though it's something we do visit from time to time on the show. 0344 499 1000. Back with more comment from you, coming next.
This all comes back to a dangerous idea, and believe me, it's infected this country too, which is we don't enforce certain laws because we've decided that we just don't like them. I don't want to hear a jip, not a whiff of anything out of anybody that says, oh, I'm a rule of law, defend the rule of law. If you defend the rule of law, you defend the right of these officers to go into work, to do their job in difficult circumstances, to enforce the law, and the laws of the land say you can't break into the country illegally.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is talk.
It is talk. Back to your calls. Jeremy Carl's here, by the way, in about 5 minutes' time for a bit of a chat as to what's going on his show. Charles is in Kent. How you doing, Charles?
I'm well, Ian. Thanks for taking my call.
It's a pleasure.
Just wanted to run a couple of points past you for food for thought regarding the immigration situation we have.
Yes.
It seems that the defenders of uncontrolled immigration, whether they're dealing with conservatives or reform people or even individuals within the population, they dismiss them and trivialise them on the basis that it's a single policy, a single issue argument, whilst ignoring the fact that it's a multi-issue problem that affects our schools, universities, NHS, prisons, roads, transportation, GPs, local authorities, or taxes, hospitals, social cohesion, you name it, I could go on. But you know, they trivialise that, where it's a situation that affects every aspect of our civilised society. Then we have the boats that are coming in, the small vessels. Now, I've always argued that if that cargo on those boats was cocaine rather than people, they would be stopped at source in the blink of an eye.
Mm-hmm.
The helmsman himself, the skipper, would be, he'd be dealt with severely and he'd put away for a long time. And I don't see why they can't do that with the helmsman of the small crafts, because they're knowingly bringing people into a country without, by illegal means. And if they were dealt with in such a way, i.e. received a severe prison sentence, just the helmsman himself, it would put the desire for anybody to helm that boat, that would be gone. And without that desire to helm the boat, that would smash the gangs, because you're removing the customer base, because nobody would want to do it. And it's just, when the population has a legitimate concern over this situation, they're just demonised and insulted as far right or low information. But it's just, to us, it seems sensible and reasonable. I just don't understand why they can't see it in such a way.
Because it's too, you'd think something that's staring you in the face, they would be able to kind of address that. But there you go, Charles. We're trying to fight the impenetrable here, it seems. Thank you for that, Charles in Kent. Dan says, me again. It's called a frill neck lizard. You'll get that. Well, not really. I think that's very few Australians would call it that. Very few Australians have heard of one, by the way. It's usually just a frilled lizard. I think it's got another name as well, if I'm perfectly honest. Thank you, Dan. I will get there. Stacey says, when my daughter was only 6, she came out of school really upset. I asked her what had happened, and she said the teacher had asked them to name Australian animals. This is reference to a point we mentioned earlier. After a lot of kids had their hands up saying popular things like kangaroo, koala bear, wallaby, my daughter, who is usually very anxious to put her hand up, as she was so excited to know another one, the teacher asked her the name of the animal, and she replied, quokka. The teacher had never heard of a quokka, so she was told she was wrong. Isn't a quokka like a little marsupial-y, sort of squirrely thing? Anyway, the teacher had never heard of one, said she was wrong. The next day she took her National Geographic magazine with an article about quokkas, a little ornament and a soft toy. She had to show him that they were real, seeing as the teacher was sitting at a desk with a computer. It would have been so easy for him to Google and not tell her she was wrong in the first place. That's really mean, isn't it? That's really mean. Thing. If I said to you, name an Australian animal, what would you first say?
Koala.
Without saying koala.
Dingo.
A dingo, yeah. I mean,
kangaroo.
That's just a wild dog. Kangaroo's obvious. You've got do you know about frilled lizards?
I beg your pardon?
Frilled lizards.
This terrible image just came through my head.
Do you know about...
Can we go mute so I can tell you what I want to say?
The duck-billed platypus.
The what?
The duck-billed platypus.
Yeah, I know about the duck-billed platypus. That's my first wife, to be honest.
Lovely.
Hey.
Lovely bit of kit, your duck-billed platypus.
Lovely bit, yeah.
Beautiful.
Why are we talking about Australia and animals? What's going on?
I can't... Do you know, this is how this... You know how these shows work?
No idea.
I can't remember how we got into it in the first place.
Always
we were
the best
talking
form
about
of radio.
The population of Australia came up. What do you think the population of Australia is?
I'm going to say 18 million.
18.
What is it?
27.
Wasn't bad, was it?
I said 10. Well, I said 12.
Yeah, but you're an intelligent man. You espouse, I think, the qualities of every intelligent broadcaster I've ever worked with.
To the point that I literally was half wrong on my guess.
Are you feeling upset about this?
Yeah.
Did you have a nice weekend?
It was all right.
Ryan rang me drunk. This is true. He rang me at 12 o'clock. The kids were swimming. Do you know about this? It's genuinely true, right? And what the hell did I do? Right, he said to me, I'm with my mates in Bournemouth. That's brave. He said, what's going to win?
It was in Margate, wasn't it?
Well, I don't care where he was. Anyway, we went there once. It was closed. And he said, what's going to win the derby? And I went, Lambourne, 10-1. And they all backed it and it won.
Seriously?
And I was swimming, and I didn't even... I wasn't swimming, because if I jump in, the water jumps out. But I was taking the kids swimming. And they all won money.
So you're kind of the John McCririck of
Do you know, I interviewed John McCririck once, and he said to me, everybody hates me. I said, no, they don't. I want everybody to hate me. I said, no, you don't. You're as soft as anything underneath. He went, no, I'm not. And he called his wife, what was it?
Yes, he had a name for his wife.
The booby.
That's right.
And he lived in London, in Regent's Park, in this strange... You had to go through sort of fines to get to his house, and he used to sit there and smoke massive cigars and drink cognac and eat pâté. Honestly, I'm not even joking.
It's an odd character, wasn't he?
He was very strange, but those are the days where television could have characters.
Well, indeed, I was about to say.
Rather than bland, beige, whatever.
He put it on, he put horse racing on the map in many respects.
Yeah.
And
so I only went on Wednesday. Since I went on Wednesday, Zia, I'm joking.
Zia's gone.
He's resigned, rejoined, and now is talking about mass deportations. We've had the burqa ban that wasn't banned, now it's back. Now old Badenoch's risen her head above the parapet.
Yeah, it's
and
back
we've had
on
a
the
screeching U-turn, and I've been trying to... You heard my joke outside. Is that broadcastable? Adam's face will fill full of fear.
Do most people know what a ewe is, though?
Right. So a ewe is a female sheep. So I was in my driving test, and the examiner said, can you make a U-turn? I'll tell you the rest on drive time. You laughed, didn't you? Den went, that's brilliant.
Yeah.
Good luck.
Although in Australia
Yes.
they would say, can you chuck a ewe?
Are you going to Australia? Are you trying to tell us that